Hello, curious minds, and welcome to Documentary for Sleep. If you're here tonight, it might be because your thoughts are still restless, circling questions bigger than yourself, or maybe you just need something calm, steady, and human to keep you company. Whether you're lying in bed, drifting towards sleep, or letting this play softly in the background while cooking, showering, or working with headphones on, this is your moment to slow down and wander backward into the oldest stories humans have ever told. Not into fantasy, but into soft science, anthropology, psychology, and the deep memory of our species. Tonight, we'll explore why humans across every culture and every age have believed in gods, myths, and the supernatural. What was it in our minds and in our societies that made these stories not only survive, but shape who we are? We don't have all the answers, but we do have the bones, the rituals, and the questions. And if you happen to fall asleep halfway through, that's perfectly fine. I've left full timestamps in the description so you can pick up exactly where you left off tomorrow, because this story from beginning to end is worth hearing. And if this kind of calm, long-form storytelling helps you relax, focus, or just make sense of a noisy world, consider liking this video and subscribing. It helps this little corner of quiet science reach more curious sapiens like you, and I'd love to hear from you. Where do you listen from? Is it late at night in your room? Or are you on a quiet shift somewhere far away? And as always, stay curious, stay calm. The storm was a living entity, a chaos of wind and water that hammered against the thin fabric of the world. Inside a shallow cave, the only reality was the scent of wet earth and the tight circle of warmth from huddled bodies. Then, the universe tore itself apart. A white-hot claw of light ripped through the blackness, striking an ancient oak just meters from the shelter. The sound that followed was not a sound but a physical force, a concussion that vibrated in the chest and rattled the teeth. And then, something new. A flicker, then a dance. A hungry orange light began to consume the wounded tree. A child, pressed against its mother, stared, wide-eyed, not at the terror but at the wonder. In that primal moment, the first humans saw not just a flash of lightning, but a question made of fire. Deep within the skull of that child, a biological alarm system, honed over millennia, was screaming. The Homo sapiens brain is wired for survival, and its most urgent priority is to make sense of the sudden and the loud. A crack of thunder is not processed as a random atmospheric event. It is an immediate threat, triggering a cascade of adrenaline and hypervigilance. This neural machinery, designed to spot the pattern of a predator in the rustling grass, now faced an incomprehensible power. It had to assign meaning. The brain, in its desperate need to understand, began its work not with physics, but with narrative. It registered the event as an action, and every action implies an actor. This primal impulse to personify did not fade with that single storm. It echoed across continents and millennia, becoming the bedrock of human consciousness. From the frozen north, where Thor's hammer blows shook the very pillars of Asgard, to the monsoonal plains of India, where Indra wielded his Vajra, the lightning bolt was never merely a discharge of static electricity. It was the weapon of a capricious god, a sign of divine anger or favor. The Aztec god Tlaloc demanded tears, and the storm was his weeping fury. In every culture, the impersonal force of nature was given a face, a name, and a will. It was a story told to explain the unexplainable, to transform paralyzing fear into a relationship, however fraught, with a powerful, invisible neighbor. Even now, in our age of satellites and scientific certainty, a part of that ancient brain stirs when the sky growls. We can recite the facts of colliding ice particles and convective updrafts, yet a close crack of thunder on a dark night can still send a shiver down the spine that feels older than reason. It is a ghost of a feeling, a whisper from the cave that suggests, against all our knowledge, that there might be an intention behind the violence. The fear is no longer of the fire, but of the hand that might have cast it. Yet this raises a curious paradox. the family of dogs cowering under the bed during a storm, their whimpers a mirror of our own ancestral fear, do not emerge to build altars to a thunderhound. They feel the terror, their bodies reacting with the same survival instincts, but they do not weave a myth around it. The biological reaction is necessary, but it is not sufficient. Something else is required, a unique cognitive leap. It is the leap from experiencing an event to demanding a reason for it, from feeling fear to crafting a story to contain that fear. The animal simply endures the storm. The human must explain it. So, in that first glimpse of celestial fire, a new world was conceived. It was not the world of trees and rivers, but a world of invisible actors and hidden agendas. The lightning was the catalyst, but the true creation was the story spun around it. The first spark to ignite was not in the tree, but in the mind. And if the storm could have a will, then what else in the vast and different universe might be watching? You are walking through a forest. The light is dappled, the air is cool, and the silence is a thick blanket. Then, a sound, a rustle in the undergrowth. Instantly, your body freezes. Your heart hammers a single urgent beat. Before you can even form a coherent thought, your mind has already delivered its verdict. Something is there. You don't need to see a face. You don't need a reason. Your brain, in a flash of lightning-fast computation, has already done the essential work. It has assigned an intention to that random noise. It is no longer just leaves. It is a presence. It is watching. It is waiting. This impulse is not a flaw. It is a feature carved into the very architecture of our minds by millions of years of survival. Deep within the human brain lies a specialized circuit, an ancient alarm system that psychologists call an intentionality detector. For our ancestors on the savannah, the cost of being wrong was asymmetrical. To mistake the wind for a stalking leopard was a brief moment of fear, quickly forgotten, but to mistake a stalking leopard for the wind was a final, fatal error. Evolution, therefore, favored the paranoid. It built a brain that would rather see a face in the moon and a predator in every shadow than miss a single genuine threat. This neural machinery ensured that we survived to see another sunrise, but it also left us with a profound legacy, a world perpetually pregnant with purpose, where every event whispers of a hidden will. We can trace the footprints of this instinct not just in our biology, but in the very foundations of human civilization. Long before the scientific method, our ancestors looked upon a chaotic and unpredictable world and sought the hands guiding the storm. When a drought withered their crops or a plague swept through their village, the human mind, wired for intention, could not accept mere chance. The failing rains became the anger of a sky god. The sickness was the curse of a displeased ancestor. From the sun-scorched temples of ancient Egypt to the mist-shrouded highlands of Papua New Guinea, humanity's earliest rituals were built upon this fundamental act of projection. We gave thought to the thunder and malice to the earthquake, populating the universe with a pantheon of beings whose intentions we hoped, appease or influence. And have we truly outgrown this? The language of the modern world may have shed the robes of ancient deities, but the cognitive engine hums on. When a person looks at a streak of misfortune and says, "The universe is testing me," or finds a profound personal meaning in a random coincidence, they are engaging in the same timeless dance. We still imbue the impersonal forces of fate, karma, or the market with a kind of agency. We speak of history's unfolding or a plan for our lives, seeking comfort in the narrative that even chaos has an author. This need to find a sender for every message, a playwright for every tragedy, is the direct descendant of that primal flinch in the forest. But what happens when this exquisite tool becomes a tyrant? When the brain's intention detector fires too readily, seeing conspiracy in coincidence and personal vendettas in statistical probability? Every shadow becomes a demon, every failure a punishment from the cosmos, every success a divine endorsement. The very mechanism that once ensured our survival can now weave a cage of anxiety and paranoia. Is this deep-seated belief, then, our greatest cognitive shield, or is it the original trap? Does it connect us to a deeper truth about a purposeful cosmos? Or does it merely reveal the haunting echo of our own lonely consciousness projected onto a silent, indifferent universe? The evolution of the human brain did more than just help us navigate the physical world. It compelled us to construct a parallel one, a world of invisible actors and hidden agendas. It taught us to read the intentions behind the eyes of others, and then, inevitably, to look for them in the rustling leaves, in the star-filled sky, and in the silent final moment of death. And from this fertile ground of perceived purpose, a new concept began to take root, an answer to the most unsettling silence of all. If every sound implies a listener, and every action an agent, then what, or who, leaves the body when the breath is gone? A child's voice, small and persistent, cuts through the noise of the world. Where did Daddy go? This question, asked in 1,000 different languages across 1,000,000 years, is perhaps the oldest mystery. No one has ever seen a soul depart. No one has ever held one in their hands. Yet in every corner of the globe, in cultures separated by oceans and millennia, a conviction persists. The dead are not gone. They have simply gone elsewhere. This belief feels as innate as breathing, but its origins are etched not in some ethereal realm, but in the very biology of our being. We are a unique animal, burdened and gifted with the terrible knowledge of our own end. Our large brains, wired for pattern and cause, confront the ultimate disruption. A living, breathing person is here, and then, inexplicably, they are not. The mind rebels against this void. It scrambles for an explanation, a narrative to soften the brutal finality. Perhaps, the brain whispers, they have not vanished. Perhaps they have only moved to a place we cannot see, a shadowland just beyond the firelight. This cognitive leap, from absence to an unseen presence, may be the first fragile stirring of the soul, a psychological necessity born from an unbearable truth. We can trace the footprints of this idea deep into the earth itself. In a shallow grave in Shanidar Cave, a Neanderthal was laid to rest over 60,000 years ago, their bodies surrounded by clumps of pollen. Was it a deliberate offering of flowers? We cannot know for sure, but the gesture speaks of care, of a ritual that transcends mere disposal of a body. Later, across the ancient world, the dead were buried with tools, weapons, and food, provisions for a journey. A stone axe placed in a cold hand, a clay bowl of grain set beside a silent head. These artifacts are a silent, powerful testimony. They suggest a community that saw death not as an end, but as a transition. The soul, it seems, was a practical concept long before it was a philosophical one. It was the answer to the question of what the deceased might need in the world to come. And what of us, in our modern age of reason? Science has mapped the genome and probed the cosmos, yet it remains silent on the matter of the soul. It cannot be weighed, imaged, or measured. Yet the belief endures, stubbornly resilient. It surfaces in the universal comfort of organized religion, with its promises of paradise and reunion. It appears in the quiet, private moments of grief, when a loved one visits in a dream so vivid it feels more real than waking life. Is this merely the brain's chemistry, a trick of memory and longing? Or is it a glimpse, a fleeting connection across a boundary we still cannot define? The need for the soul seems to be woven into the fabric of our consciousness, a deep-seated answer to the profound loneliness that mortality imposes. So, we are left with a paradox. Is the soul a discovered truth, a fundamental aspect of existence that we intuitively perceive? Or is it the most beautiful, most necessary fiction we have ever created? A psychological balm for the wound of loss, a story we tell ourselves because the alternative, the sheer, absolute silence of non-existence, is too devastating to bear. Does our belief confirm its reality, or does our desperation invent it? When the soul persists, becomes the default setting of the human heart, everything changes. The world is no longer a brief, brutal interval between two oblivions. It becomes a single chapter in a much longer story. The living and the dead coexist in a delicate, ongoing relationship. And in that space, in the fertile ground between memory and hope, the first seeds of something immense begin to sprout. If the soul journeys on, who better to guide it, and who better to watch over the living than those who walked the path before us? What role do the first ancestors, the pioneers of death, now play? The fire crackles, a defiant orange eye in the vast velvety darkness of the African night. Around it, the elders of the village gather, their faces etched with the maps of long lives, glowing in the flickering light. It is the night of the full moon, a silver coin pinned to the black canvas of the sky. One by one, they begin to speak, not to each other, but to the emptiness beyond the firelight. They call out names, a litany of the departed, great hunters, wise mothers, founders of lineages. The air grows thick with more than just wood smoke. It is heavy with presence. They speak of harvests and disputes, of births and worries, as if giving a report to unseen superiors. Here, in this ancient ritual, the dead are not gone. They are observers, protectors who guide the hands of the living, but also judges who can withhold rain or bring sickness upon a disrespectful descendant. The boundary between this world and the next is not a wall, but a permeable membrane, and on nights like this, the voices of the living slip through. This profound intimacy with the departed is not merely a cultural artifact. It is etched into the very architecture of our minds. We are a species with a formidable social memory. Our brains, honed over millennia, are exquisitely tuned to recognize kin, to remember alliances, and to track the complex web of relationships that ensure survival. In the dangerous theater of the prehistoric world, remembering that your grandfather knew where the water holes were in a drought, or that your grandmother understood which berries brought fever, was not a sentimental exercise. It was a critical survival strategy. The image of the ancestor, preserved in story and ritual, became a living library of hard-won knowledge. To keep them alive in the collective consciousness was to keep their wisdom accessible. The warmth of the ancestral fire, then, might be a psychological echo of a primal need, the guttural understanding that our own lives are extended backward in time through the experiences of those who came before. We stand on the shoulders of giants we have never seen, but whom we are compelled to name. This compulsion left its mark on the earth long before the written word. From the sprawling, intricate tombs of the Han Dynasty in China, where emperors were buried with entire terracotta armies to serve them in the afterlife, to the sacred groves of the Yoruba in West Africa, where the Orisas, often deified ancestors, are invoked. The veneration of ancestors is arguably humanity's oldest and most persistent religion. These were not acts of mere remembrance. A Neolithic burial site, carefully arranged with tools, food, and ochre, was more than a grave. It was a doorway. A stone statue, weathered by rain and wind, was not just a representation. It was a conduit, a connection station between the world of the living and the world of the spirits. These physical anchors served a profound purpose. They made the abstract presence of the dead tangible. They gave the living a place to focus their appeals, their gratitude, and their fears. In building altars and raising stones, humanity was building the first switchboards for communicating with the invisible governance of their world. And this ancient wiring still hums with life, even in the heart of the modern metropolis, under the sterile glow of LED lights. In a high-rise apartment in Hanoi, a young professional still lights a stick of incense on a small altar, the fragrant smoke carrying messages to her grandparents. In Mexico, families prepare elaborate feasts for the Dia de los Muertos, welcoming the souls of the departed back for a night of celebration. We speak of a founder's vision, guiding a corporation as if it were a living force, or feel the presence of a lost loved one in a moment of decision. Is this simply a metaphor? A cultural habit? Or is it the stubborn persistence of a deep-seated psychological need to feel connected to a chain of existence that transcends our individual mortality? The ritual has been translated, The context has changed, but the fundamental impulse remains: a refusal to accept the absolute finality of death for those we have known and loved. But this raises a quiet, unsettling question. Is ancestor worship truly a belief in the supernatural, a genuine perception of an active spirit world? Or is it, at its core, something more human, more psychological? Perhaps it is the magnificent, poignant externalization of our own internal struggles, the raw ache of grief, the terror of being forgotten, the desperate desire to maintain a bond that death has severed. We project their continued influence onto the chaos of life because the alternative, that they are truly, utterly gone, and that we are ultimately alone, is too vast a silence to bear. In deeming the ancestor a watchful spirit, we grant them a continued role in our narrative. We keep them in the story of our tribe. So, was the first God, the first object of reverence, simply a grandparent? Was divinity born in the humble human soil of love, loss, and memory? From the specific beloved face of a departed kin morphing into a generalized guardian spirit, humanity took a subtle but monumental step. It began to populate the invisible world with more than just family. The world was a place of immense, unpredictable power. Fire could cook a meal or consume a forest. The wind could fill a sail or flatten a village. If the spirit of a great hunter could influence the success of the chase, could not the spirit of the river influence the catch? Could not the capricious wind have its own consciousness? The world of the ancestors was a template, a model for understanding all of nature. The logical, yet breathtaking leap was to anthropomorphize the forces themselves. The familiar relationship of reciprocity and respect that one had with a grandfather was now extended to the thundercloud, the harvest, the sea. The invisible world was no longer just a land of the dead. It was becoming a crowded, hierarchical society of powerful beings, each governing a domain of human experience. And if there could be benevolent spirits, could there not also be malevolent ones? If a respected ancestor could offer protection, could a wronged, forgotten soul not seek vengeance? The darkness beyond the firelight was not empty. It was now populated with shadows that mirrored the full spectrum of human intention. The world became a dramatic stage where humanity interacted with a host of invisible actors. But what happens when this stage expands beyond the local spirits of stream and stone? When the tribe grows into a civilization, and the questions become not just about the next harvest, but about the meaning of plague, war, and the very stars in the sky? When the feeling of powerlessness becomes not just personal, but cosmic? For the vulnerable, living on the knife edge of existence, where a single drought could mean starvation, a single illness could wipe out a family, this burgeoning invisible world offered not just explanation, but a fragile sense of agency. If you cannot control the weather, you can at least attempt to control your relationship with the entity who does. Ritual becomes a technology of negotiation. But is this negotiation not, in its essence, a desperate attempt to impose meaning on a universe that seems terrifyingly indifferent, to find a thread of purpose in the chaos? When the world is too vast, too powerful, and too unpredictable to face alone, the mind seeks a handhold, even if it has to invent one. It is a way of asserting that the events of our lives are not random, but part of a dialogue, however one-sided it may seem. So, did we create gods to explain the world, or did we create them to endure it? The child's hand is empty. It clutches at the air where a mother's warmth should be, in a world stripped bare by a famine that asks no permission. The man stands on a river of mud, the place where his house and family once laughed, now a silent brown scar carved by a flash flood. They cannot undo the disaster. The forces that reshape their lives are deaf to their pleas, and yet, in the crushing void of their powerlessness, a question forms. It is not a question for the authorities or the heavens, not one that expects an answer. It is a question for the soul. Why did this happen to me? The query is not a search for a factual reply, but a tool for survival. It is the first desperate act of building a raft in a shipwreck, a raft woven from meaning. This impulse is not a flaw in our design, but its very core. Deep within the labyrinth of the human brain, our nervous system is wired with a profound allergy to chaos. When faced with a situation we cannot control, a diagnosis, a loss, a natural catastrophe, the brain's response to sheer randomness is one of acute distress. It is a biological alarm. To quiet this alarm, the mind performs a remarkable feat of alchemy. It begins to spin narratives. It takes the senseless, jagged shards of an event and fuses them into a mosaic that, if not beautiful, is at least coherent. This is not a conscious choice like choosing what to wear, but an autonomic reflex, like a flinch. The brain, to maintain its own psychological stability, will fabricate a reason, a purpose, a why, because a world with a reason, however painful, is preferable to a world with none at all. It is a cradle built in the storm. We see the ancient blueprints of this cradle in the ashes of prehistoric fires. When the sky withheld rain or the earth shook with terrifying fury, our ancestors did not merely huddle in fear. They organized. They gathered what precious resources they had, grain, livestock, sometimes even more, and offered them in elaborate ceremonies to appease unseen forces. These rituals were not born from a confirmed theology, but from a primal need to negotiate with the uncontrollable. By creating a story in which the disaster was a result of an angered deity, they also created a path to potential salvation. If the gods were angry, they could be placated. Meaning was manufactured not as a philosophical pastime, but as a practical tool for managing existential terror. It transformed a random, indifferent universe into a responsive, if temperamental, partner. Was this the birth of religion, or simply the application of a profound psychological survival mechanism? This mechanism echoes through the ages, finding its voice in the heart of modern crises. During pandemics that empty city streets, or in the trenches of wars that redefine nations, a familiar pattern emerges. Those who have never set foot in a church find themselves praying. Atheists grapple with the haunting idea of a cosmic plan. This is not necessarily a regression into superstition, but a testament to the human spirit's refusal to be broken by absurdity. The belief that events, no matter how horrific, are part of a larger, intentional tapestry provides a fragile handhold on the cliff face of despair. The specific nature of the meaning matters less than its mere existence. Whether it is a God's will, a lesson from the universe, or the cruel necessity of karma, the narrative itself becomes a lifeline. It allows the mind to endure what the body must suffer. In the landscape of trauma, is meaning, then, the most essential nutrient for the soul? But this lifeline raises a shadow of a doubt, a whisper in the back of the mind that grows louder in moments of quiet reflection. Is the meaning we so desperately cling to a genuine glimpse into the architecture of reality? Or is it a beautiful, necessary illusion? A palliative drug administered by our own brains to make the unbearable bearable? Do we, in our vulnerability, accept a comforting falsehood simply because the truth, that tragedy can be utterly random, a cold statistic in an indifferent cosmos, is too devastating to inhabit? There is a danger in this solace. A narrative crafted to soothe can also blind. If we believe a famine is a punishment from God, do we neglect the man-made economic policies that exacerbated it? If we accept a personal loss as meant to be, do we silence the valid, raging cry for justice? The very stories that save us can also become cages, preventing us from confronting the messy, chaotic, and often unjust realities of the world. Is a comforting lie sometimes more vital than a paralyzing truth? When the need for meaning becomes as fundamental as the need for food or water, the stories we tell ourselves transcend the category of simple myth or superstition. They become a collective painkiller, a cultural immune response to the pathogen of helplessness. The rituals, the prayers, the cosmic plans, these are not signs of ignorance, but tools of resilience, honed over millennia of confronting a world far larger and more powerful than ourselves. They are the songs we sing in the dark to prove we are still alive. But this reliance on narrative begs a final, unsettling question. What happens when the world grows even more cruel, when the suffering is so vast and systematic that no story can contain it? When the scales of pain tip so far that even the most eloquent meaning feels like a hollow insult to the victims? Does the human capacity for creating significance have a breaking point? And if we were to peer over that edge, what would we find staring back at us? Perhaps a clue lies not in the glaring light of catastrophe, but in the soft, mysterious dark of sleep. Our ancestors dreamed of the dead. In the silent theater of the night, they saw the faces of those they had lost, heard their voices, felt their touch. With no understanding of the subconscious, of memory's nocturnal replay, what else could they believe? These visitations were real. They were evidence that the departed had not vanished, but merely traveled to another realm from which they could return, bearing messages or warnings. From the fertile, ungovernable soil of dreams, entire ecosystems of mythology sprouted: spirits, ghosts, gods, and demons. The dream was the first special effect, the original virtual reality, and it provided the raw material for the most profound meanings of all. If our waking mind creates stories to cope with chaos, what profound truths or illusions does our sleeping mind conjure from the depths? You wake. The room is dark, but the world inside your eyelids is brighter, more vivid than any afternoon. The figure of your grandmother, gone for a decade, stands before you. She doesn't speak, but you feel a message, a warmth, a specific and undeniable presence. Then she dissolves, not like a person walking away, but like smoke in a breeze. Your eyes open. The darkness of the bedroom is absolute, yet the afterimage of her is seared onto your mind. Your heart hammers against your ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet. And the question, unbidden and ancient, rises from the depths of your being. Was that really her? This is the territory of dreams, a shadowland where the rules of our waking world are suspended. It is a place where the dead return to counsel us, where futures are foretold, and where our deepest fears wear the faces of monsters. For a few fleeting moments, the barrier between what we know to be real and what we feel to be true becomes impossibly thin. Science offers us a map of this terrain, charting the electrical storms that illuminate the night sky of our minds. Yet even with this map in hand, the journey always feels like a visitation from another world. The gateway to this world is a biological paradox. Each night, we descend into the rapid eye movement, REM, stage of sleep. Here, the brain is a cauldron of activity. Its electrical patterns mirror those of an awake, alert state. The visual cortex fires with abandon, constructing intricate landscapes. The amygdala, the seat of emotion, runs hot, coloring these landscapes with joy, terror, or profound sorrow. But the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of the brain, the seat of logic and critical judgment, is offline. It is as if the crew of a ship has been locked in the hold, leaving the engines roaring and the helm untended. This is the open moment. Without the skeptical captain to question the strange shapes in the fog, every shadow can become a specter, every coincidence a sign. The feeling of a presence in the room, the sensation of flying, the conversation with a lost loved one. These are not supernatural events, but rather the brain's storytelling engine running free, weaving narratives from the raw, unedited data of memory and desire. Is it any wonder that in this state, the line between a memory and a messenger becomes so blurred? This biological explanation, however, feels like a skeleton without flesh when compared to the weight of history. Long before we understood brainwaves, humanity looked to dreams not as neural static, but as a sacred communication channel. For the ancient Maya, dreams were messages from the Xibalba, the underworld, a place of gods and ancestors. They had specialized shamans, the Ah-kin, whose role was to interpret these nocturnal visions. A dream of a jaguar might signal impending power, while a dream of a falling star could be a dire warning. The dream was not a personal fantasy, it was a public text, a piece of data from the spirit world that required expert decoding to guide the fate of a king or a community. In ancient Greece, pilgrims traveled to temples of Asclepius, the god of medicine, to undergo incubation. They would sleep in sacred precincts, hoping the god would visit them in a dream and reveal a cure for their ailments. The dream was a diagnostic tool, a direct line to divine wisdom. Across continents and millennia, our ancestors were united in a common belief. The night was not an empty void, but a populated landscape. The figures we met there were not mere phantoms, they were emissaries. And so we arrive at the modern mind, a strange amalgamation of these layers. We possess the scientific knowledge. We can point to the synapses and neurotransmitters. We can explain the paralysis of the body, the random firing of neurons. Yet, when we dream of a friend we haven't thought of in years, only to receive a phone call from them the next morning, the cold logic of coincidence often fails to satisfy a deeper, more primal instinct. The emotional truth of the dream overwhelms the intellectual truth of the statistic. The experience is too potent, too resonant, to be dismissed as chance. This is the power of the felt experience, the warmth of the embrace, the clarity of the voice, the specific and uncanny detail. These sensations carve a deeper groove in our psyche than any rational argument. The dream feels like a contact. And what is belief, if not the residue of powerful, repeated feeling? We are left straddling two realities, the world of measurable facts and the world of immeasurable experiences. Which one, in the quiet moments after waking, feels more real? This leads to a quiet rebellion against pure rationality. If the dream world is merely a random collage, a neurological screensaver, why does it so often feel like a key fitting a lock? Why do solutions to intractable problems emerge, fully formed from a night's sleep? Why does a dream of reconciliation feel so different from simply imagining it? The randomness seems suspiciously meaningful. It suggests that perhaps our waking consciousness is not the entirety of our mind, but merely the tip of an iceberg. Beneath the surface of deliberate thought lies a vast, hidden self, processing information in ways we cannot access directly. It speaks to us in the symbolic language of dreams. In this light, the visitation from a departed loved one may not be their ghost, but rather our own subconscious, using their cherished image to deliver a message we are not ready to hear in the plain light of day. But does knowing the messenger is internal make the message any less valid, or any less profound? When the boundary between fact and feeling is softened by the darkness, the dream becomes the first and most personal evidence for an invisible world. It is the original seed of the supernatural. If we can be visited in the night, then the night must be populated. The figures we encounter cannot simply vanish at dawn. They must go somewhere. And so, the invisible world begins to gather citizens. The benevolent presence becomes an ancestor spirit, a guardian angel. The malevolent force becomes a demon, a shadowy entity. The dream is the cradle of gods and ghosts, the private theater where the human imagination first rehearsed the idea that there is more to existence than what the hand can touch and the eye can see. It is the primordial soup from which mythologies eventually coalesced. But what happens when we step out of our private dreamscapes and into the shared dream of the waking world? If a dream can grant a single tree an aura of personality, what then of the entire whispering forest? If the shadow in our bedroom can feel like a presence, what of the vast, shifting shadows cast by a primordial jungle under a full moon? Does the mind, once it has learned to populate the darkness of night, inevitably begin to populate the daylight world as well? The air in the Amazon is not empty. It is a thick, warm broth of scent and sound. For a child who has strayed too far from the village, the familiar path swallowed by the green, this thickness becomes a palpable presence. The light fades, painting the world in shades of emerald and shadow. He stands before the buttressed roots of a giant kapok tree, a wooden wall that seems to hold up the sky. The leaves above rustle, not with the wind, for there is none, but with a sound that curls into his ear like a whisper. It is a language without words, a conversation of creaks and sighs. As darkness falls, a primal fear, older than his own brief life, rises in his throat. He sinks to his knees, pressing his small hands into the damp earth, and addresses the only listener he can conceive of in the immense, breathing silence. "Spirit of the forest," he whispers, "please spare me." This instinct to see a face in the foliage, to hear a voice in the void, is not a quirk of a single culture or a childish fantasy. It is etched into the very architecture of the human brain. We are born pattern recognition machines, our survival for millennia hinging on a hair-trigger ability to spot the subtle signs of danger or opportunity. Was that a flicker of striped fur in the grass, or just a trick of the light? Better to assume the tiger and run. The brain's temporal lobe, a region dedicated to facial and vocal recognition, is so exquisitely tuned that it often fires even when the stimulus is incomplete. We see the man in the moon, the scowling face in the knots of a tree trunk. This neural tendency, known as pareidolia, is the biological cradle of the soul. It is the fundamental cognitive act of projecting a who onto a what. Before there could be a god in a storm, there had to be an intention behind the thunderclap, a mind, however inscrutable, where before there was only blind force. Our hardware is wired for hauntings. This neurological inclination found its full expression in the world's first and most enduring spiritual framework, animism. Long before cathedrals or temples pierced the sky, the human sense of the sacred was horizontal, woven into the fabric of the world itself. For our hunter-gatherer ancestors, the forest was not a collection of resources, but a society of beings. The river had its mood, sometimes generous, sometimes vengeful. The bear was a powerful, respected elder, the deer a willing but cautious relative. The rock that gave shelter was a benevolent guardian, the volcano that rained fire was a wrathful giant. This was not mere superstition, but a sophisticated empirical philosophy born from intimate dependence. To survive, one had to understand the character of the land, to read its intentions. By granting a spirit to the mountain, they were acknowledging its agency, its power over their lives. It was a relationship built on reciprocity and respect, a way of navigating a world they could not control by treating it as a community of which they were only a part. And this ancient software still runs in the background of our modern minds, even as we navigate concrete landscapes instead of primal woods. We speak of a house having a good feeling, or a room feeling oppressive. We sense a presence in an empty historic building, a whisper of stories soaked into the walls. An athlete might kiss the turf of a storied stadium, thanking the ground itself for its favor. We no longer worship the river god, but we might say the old factory machine has a mind of its own. This persistent habit of personification reveals a deep-seated need to converse with our environment, to find a partner in the silence. It is the ghost of the forest, trailing us into the metropolis. But this ghost raises a haunting doubt. Is the spirit of the forest a genuine perception of a world alive with consciousness? Or is it merely a psychological crutch, a story we tell ourselves to ward off the terror of insignificance? When the child pleads with the tree, is he connecting with a real, sentient presence in the wood, or is he simply comforting himself in the face of an indifferent universe? To see intention in a lightning strike is to transform a random event into a meaningful one, perhaps a punishment, perhaps a warning. This is infinitely less terrifying than the alternative, that the bolt strikes without reason, without care, and we are simply in its way. By giving nature a personality, we make it something we can negotiate with, plead with, or appease. We replace chaos with character. But does this act of imagination bring us closer to the truth of the world, or does it simply clothe a vast, uncaring emptiness in the familiar garments of mind and motive? Are we discovering spirits, or are we creating them out of a profound and lonely need? From the solitary tree that becomes a sanctuary to the raging volcano that becomes a god, humanity has consistently performed this act of enchantment. We have draped the world in a tapestry of names and stories, populating it with beings that reflect our own fears, hopes, and complexities. In doing so, we transformed the planet from a mere collection of objects into a subject, a vast, interconnected community where every stone, stream, and star has its own inner life. This worldview does not place humanity at the pinnacle of creation, but situates us within a democracy of souls. We are not the masters, but one voice in a colossal chorus. It is a perspective that fosters humility and reverence, a deep ecological ethic born from kinship. Yet, this very act of creating a community of beings inevitably leads to a new hierarchy. If the forest is a society, who is its leader? If the world is alive with will, whose will is ultimate? The child's plea to the forest spirit contains the seed of a much larger question, one that would eventually reshape human destiny. If everything has a spirit, then who speaks for the whole? And if the forest itself could answer, what stories would it tell to keep its own children safe in the dark? The chill of the night is not merely a drop in temperature, but a signal. It pulls the community inward, away from the vast, unknowable darkness of the plains and forests, toward a single, defiant point of light. The fire crackles, a living, breathing entity at the center of the circle. Its light dances on the faces of the tribe, the wide, unblinking eyes of the children huddled close, the weathered, knowing features of the elders, the attentive gazes of the hunters and gatherers. The air smells of wood smoke and earth. An elder, his face a map of a long life, leans forward. The firelight catches the deep lines around his eyes as he begins to speak, his voice a low rumble that competes with the snap of the flames. He tells of a time when the sun disappeared, swallowed whole by a great scaled dragon of the sky. He describes the terror, the creeping cold. But then, he says, the ancestors remembered the rhythm of the heart, the pulse of life itself. They took their drums, and they beat a rhythm so primal, so insistent, that it shook the very heavens. The dragon, confused and agitated by this thunder from below, released the sun. The children gasp, their own hearts beating a little faster. The adults nod, not in surprise, but in recognition. This is not new information. It is a remembering. The story is told, and in the telling, it survives another generation. It becomes more than a memory. It becomes a part of them. This ritual, repeated for millennia around countless fires, taps into a fundamental wiring of the human brain. We are not by nature creatures designed to retain lists of dry facts. Our memory is a storyteller, not an archivist. Information woven into a narrative, especially one rich with vivid imagery, rhythmic language, and emotional stakes, burns itself into our neural pathways with far greater efficiency than any standalone datum. The dragon is a more potent and memorable symbol than the abstract concept of a solar eclipse. The drumbeat is a more tangible solution than a complex astronomical explanation. This biological preference for story is an evolutionary heirloom. It allowed our ancestors to encode survival-critical knowledge, which plants are poisonous, how to track prey, the dangers of a changing season. A story about a hunter who died after eating a certain berry is far more compelling, and thus more likely to be accurately passed down, than a simple warning label. The rhythm of the elder's voice, the collective fear felt by the listeners, the triumphant climax, these elements act as cognitive glue, ensuring the lesson sticks. The story becomes a vessel, and the knowledge it carries is the precious cargo that ensures the survival of the group. Is our very consciousness, then, not just a collection of experiences, but a curated library of the stories we have been told and the ones we tell ourselves? The echoes of these ancient campfires resonate across continents and centuries, revealing a startling pattern. Isolated cultures from the Mesopotamian valleys to the indigenous tribes of the Americas have passed down stories with uncanny similarities. A great flood that cleansed the world, giants who walked the earth in a primordial age, a cosmic serpent embodying chaos and creation. The prevalence of these archetypal myths suggests something profound. It is not that a single story spread across the globe, but that the human mind, faced with the same fundamental mysteries, the origin of the world, the power of nature, the fact of death, seems to arrive at similar narrative solutions. The oral tradition was the network through which these solutions were shared and refined. Each telling was not a perfect replication, but a subtle mutation, adapting the story to a new environment, a new challenge. The core, however, the mythological DNA, remained intact. These stories became the first shared textbooks of humanity, written not on papyrus or clay, but on the more durable medium of collective memory. Could these recurring motifs be fragments of a shared human language, spoken long before the Tower of Babel, a language whose grammar is written in our genes? This ancient art is far from obsolete. It has simply found new fires to gather around. Modern education has discovered that students grasp complex scientific concepts more readily when they are framed as a narrative. The journey of a water molecule, the epic battle between a virus and the immune system. Religions are built upon foundational stories that provide meaning, morality, and a map for the afterlife. Even the secular world of marketing understands that a product with a story, of craftsmanship, of heritage, of transformation, is more powerful than one with just a list of features. Our news cycles are dominated not by raw data, but by the human interest story, the personal narrative that allows us to connect with events on the other side of the planet. The structure of the hero's journey, identified in mythologies worldwide, is the same structure that underpins our most beloved films and novels. We are, it seems, forever telling ourselves the same kinds of stories, only the costumes and settings have changed. If our ancient ancestors used stories to explain the sun and the moon, do we not now use them to explain black holes and the Big Bang, crafting new cosmologies from the same timeless narrative clay? Yet, a question lingers in the smoke, a quiet challenge to this neat explanation. If oral tradition is so fragile, subject to the whims of memory and the distortions of time, how did these stories maintain their power and coherence for so long? Perhaps the purpose was never simply about the accurate transmission of information, like a game of telephone spanning generations. Maybe the act of storytelling was, and is, something far more creative. It is not merely a way of describing the world, but of building a new one. Around the fire, humanity was not just a passive observer of a terrifying and indifferent universe. For the duration of the story, they became the center of it. The dragon was not just a random event. It was a villain to be overcome by human ingenuity and courage. The flood was not just a natural disaster. It was a divine judgment and a promise of renewal. The story created a world where human actions mattered, where chaos could be given a name and a shape, and thus, potentially, controlled. It was a sanctuary of meaning built against the silent, meaningless void. Was the campfire, then, the first universe humanity ever built? A small, warm dome of significance in the cold, infinite dark? The story told around the fire does not merely recount the world. It actively remakes it, stitch by stitch, from the raw materials of fear, wonder, and memory. And when a story is told with enough conviction, when it is breathed into life by the collective belief of a community, it transcends its status as metaphor. It becomes a living truth. The dragon is real because its terror is felt in the hearts of the children. The ancestral drums are real because their rhythm is heard in the pulse of the listeners. In the flickering light, where shadow and substance blend, the gods themselves step forth from the flames and the thunder. They are as real as the shared breath of the tribe, born not of stone or sky, but of the profound human need for a story that includes us. And if a story can give birth to a god, what other realities might we be speaking into existence, even now, around the flickering screens that have become our modern hearths? The night air in the clearing was thick, not just with humidity, but with a new metallic scent of fear. Earlier that day, a hunter had returned not with game, but with a story carved into the mud near the river, a set of paw prints larger than a man's spread hand, with claws that dug deep into the soft earth. A great cat, a spirit of the shadows, had drawn its boundary line frighteningly close to their shelters. As darkness fell, the familiar sounds of the forest, the chirping of insects, the distant call of a night bird, seemed to transform into a symphony of threats. No one would sleep. Sleep was a vulnerability they could not afford. Instead, they did what their ancestors had always done. They built the fire higher, its flames licking at the blackness, pushing back the invisible. They took up drums, their rhythmic, thunderous beat, not a melody, but a declaration, a wall of sound erected against the silence where danger lurked. An elder began a chant, a low, guttural invocation to the protector spirit of the forest, a plea for vigilance and mercy. No one could say if the ritual would physically deter the beast. But as the rhythm synchronized their heartbeats and the firelight danced in their wide eyes, a palpable shift occurred. The chaotic, individual terror that had gripped each heart began to morph into a singular, shared resolve. The fear was still there, but it was no longer theirs alone to carry. It had been collectivized. This ancient scene is more than a relic of a primitive past. It is a window into a profound biological and psychological truth. When human beings experience panic as a collective, a fascinating chain reaction occurs within each individual. Our autonomic nervous systems, the ancient wiring responsible for the primal fight or flight response, do not operate in a vacuum. They are deeply social. The sight of another's widened eyes, the sound of their panicked breath, the subtle pheromonal signals of distress, these are all triggers that can ignite our own sympathetic nervous system, creating a cascade of fear. It's a contagion far more rapid and visceral than any virus. In this state, the individual mind is overwhelmed. Logic retreats, and pure instinct takes over. The ritual then becomes a brilliant cultural technology for managing this biological emergency. The coordinated drumming, the unified chanting, the shared focus on the fire. These acts force a synchronization of physiological states. Heart rates, once erratic with individual panic, begin to steady to the common drumbeat. Breath, once shallow and quick, finds a new rhythm in the chant. The ritual does not eliminate the fear. It harnesses it. It provides a script, a series of actions that transform the paralyzing, solitary emotion of terror into the empowering, collective emotion of defiance and control. Is this not a form of magic? The ability to transmute the lead of individual dread into the gold of communal courage? The archaeological record is a silent testament to this enduring human strategy. Across continents and millennia, from the cave paintings of Lascaux depicting hunts with a reverence that borders on the ceremonial to the grand, bloodletting rituals of the Maya under the threat of drought, we see a pattern. When faced with collective existential threats, famine, pestilence, an enemy tribe, or the inexplicable fury of a volcano, human societies consistently turn to ritual. The dancing around the fire, the sacrificial offerings, the elaborate ceremonies of purification. These were not mere superstitions. They were the operating system for collective emotion. Religion, in its earliest forms, can be understood as this very framework. A shared script, a collective drama into which individual anxieties could be poured and given a shape. A community facing a plague did not have the scientific vocabulary for viruses, but it had a vocabulary for sin, for displeasing the gods. By performing a ritual of atonement, they were not just pleading with invisible forces. They were taking action. They were creating a narrative of cause and effect where there was only chaos. The ritual provided a lever, however illusory, to pull in a world that seemed terrifyingly unresponsive. Could it be that the primary function of these early beliefs was not to explain the world, but to make it bearable for the community living within it? This psychological technology is not confined to the distant past. We see its echoes in our modern institutions of grief and solace. A funeral, for instance, is rarely a private affair. It is a collective ritual where a community gathers to perform a set of prescribed actions, speaking in hushed tones, sharing memories, lighting candles, singing hymns. These acts are a container for a pain that is too vast for one person to hold. They allow a group of individuals to process a shared loss simultaneously, to distribute the weight of sorrow across many shoulders. The incense rising, the solemn music, the recited prayers, they are not so different from the drums and chants of the ancient tribe. They give a structure to the formless void of grief. We tell ourselves we believe in an afterlife, in a benevolent God, partly out of genuine faith, but also partly because we desperately need our fear of death and our anguish of loss to have a recognizable shape. We need to believe that our emotions are not just meaningless neurological fireworks, but are part of a larger, intelligible story. Is our faith, then, sometimes a beautifully crafted vessel designed to carry the unmanageable weight of our collective human feelings? But this raises a provocative counter-question. If the core function is merely a form of emotional rehearsal, a societal pressure valve, then is it strictly necessary to drape this process in the garb of the supernatural? Is the invocation of gods and spirits an indispensable part of the equation? Or is it a historical contingency, a language we developed before we had the words for psychology and sociology? Could the same sense of communal solidarity and physiological synchrony be achieved through purely secular means? A town hall meeting in the face of a crisis, a coordinated scientific response, a shared commitment to a humanist ideal? When we attribute our collective comfort to the intervention of a divine protector, are we perhaps missing the real source of our strength, which is the community itself? What if the gods were never listening, and the true power was always in the act of coming together and raising our voices as one? From the drum beats echoing through the primal forest to the solemn bells tolling from a church spire, we trace a continuous thread in the human experience. It reveals a fundamental axiom. When fear is shared, it ceases to be a private monster under the bed and transforms into a public challenge to be faced. It becomes a kind of faith, not necessarily in a deity, but in the collective itself. And when that collective faith proves durable enough to weather storms, to stare down the darkness season after season, a subtle but profound transposition occurs. The externalized protector, the god or spirit we pleaded with, begins to seem less like an external force and more like a reflection of the strength we have discovered in our united front. The boundary between the divine and the communal starts to blur. We built the ritual to summon a god, but in doing so, we summoned the best of ourselves. And in the flickering firelight of that realization, we are left to wonder, if a shared fear can create a god, what else might a shared hope be able to build? This blurring of lines leads us to a more intimate frontier, a place where the gods we worship begin to look unsettlingly familiar. The thunder god is not just powerful, he is wrathful, prone to fits of rage. The goddess of love is not just benevolent, she is capricious, capable of jealousy and sweet revenge. The god of the sea is temperamental, his moods shifting like the tides. From the quarreling pantheon of Mount Olympus to the demanding deities of the Aztec world, we have consistently populated the heavens with beings who embody exaggerated human emotions. We have, in a sense, taken the messy, unpredictable contents of our own hearts and projected them onto the cosmos. We could not comprehend a world governed by impersonal, abstract forces. To understand it, we had to give it a personality, a motivation, a story we could grasp. Is this act of cosmic storytelling the highest form of empathy, or the ultimate act of self-absorption? Zeus, in a fit of jealous rage, hurls a thunderbolt at a mortal who dared to challenge his authority. Loki, the silver-tongued trickster, weaves a web of deceit that unravels the very fabric of his world. Shiva, the cosmic dancer, destroys entire universes with the fire from his third eye, only to begin the cycle of creation anew. These are not distant, incomprehensible forces of pure energy. They are personalities, magnified to a cosmic scale, They love with a terrifying passion, rage with the fury of 1,000 storms, and scheme with a cunning that echoes in the politics of every human court. The only true difference is their power and their immortality. They act with an impunity that we can only dream of, their dramas playing out on a stage as vast as the heavens themselves. They are, in essence, us, only stronger, older, and unbound by the mortal consequences that give our own flaws their tragic weight. This impulse to see ourselves in the world is not a cultural artifact. It is woven into the very circuitry of our brains. From infancy, we are hardwired for a specific kind of social intelligence. Our survival once depended on predicting the behavior of others, the intentions of a rival, the mood of a leader, the loyalty of a friend. This neural machinery, so adept at reading human faces and motives, does not simply switch off when we confront the non-human. It whirs to life, projecting agency and intention onto the ambiguous. We see a face in the gnarled bark of a tree, a malevolent will in the sudden squall that sinks a boat, a benevolent hand in the timely rain that saves a harvest. Our pet cat is not just acting on instinct, it is being spiteful or affectionate. This tendency, known as hyperactive agency detection, is a cognitive shortcut. It is far easier and evolutionarily safer to assume a predator is behind the rustling grass than to dismiss it as the wind. This same mechanism, scaled up, becomes the foundation of divinity. Before a storm can be a meteorological event, it is the roaring anger of a god. Before the sunrise can be a planetary rotation, it is the daily victory of light over darkness, steered by a celestial charioteer. We paint the blank canvas of the universe with the only colors we possess, our own emotions and desires. The great mythologies of the world are the epic poems written by this universal human impulse. They are not attempts at objective science, but rather profound psychological documentaries. The gods of Olympus are a breathtakingly dysfunctional family, their Mount Olympus a celestial soap opera of adultery, betrayal, and fragile egos. They bicker, they play favorites, they punish with petty vindictiveness. The Norse pantheon is no different. Its members are bound by oaths they know they might break, marching toward a fate they cannot avoid, their heroism tinged with a melancholy acceptance of impermanence. In the Hindu tradition, the gods embody the immense contradictory forces of existence itself. Creation, preservation, and destruction are not abstract concepts, but the domains of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, each with their own complex personalities and narratives. These are not portraits of perfect beings to be emulated in every way. They are mirrors, reflecting the full, untamed spectrum of human nature back at us, amplified and set to a mythic score. They externalize our internal conflicts, giving form to the warring impulses within our own hearts. Even in our modern, seemingly disenchanted world, this myth-making instinct has not vanished. It has simply changed its vocabulary. We may no longer blame Poseidon for a shipwreck, but we speak of the universe sending us a sign when a chance encounter alters the course of our lives. We don't attribute a streak of bad luck to the whims of an angry spirit, but we might feel that fate is testing us. A sudden, serendipitous opportunity is not a gift from the gods, but the stars aligning. This is the language of a secular mythology, a way of imposing a narrative of intentionality onto the random, chaotic events of life. It is a comfort, a way to feel that we are in a conversation with existence, rather than just shouting into a silent, indifferent void. We are still telling stories about the world, stories in which we are the central character, and the cosmos is a character too, sometimes a mentor, sometimes an antagonist. Are we then simply talking to a magnified version of ourselves, using the universe as a sounding board for our own hopes and fears? This line of questioning leads to a potentially unsettling frontier. If the gods are indeed projections of our own psyche, magnificent sculptures carved from the clay of our needs and fears, what does that say about the religions built around them? Does this psychological origin strip faith of its objective value, reducing it to a sophisticated form of solipsism, a long, elaborate conversation with our own reflection. It is a compelling argument. One could view prayer as a method of focused introspection, ritual as a way of acting out internal dramas, and sacred texts as collective dream journals of the human race. The danger, of course, lies in the magnification. When we project our own tribal biases, our own fears and hatreds onto a divine screen, they gain an unassailable authority. A personal prejudice becomes a holy decree. A cultural norm becomes an eternal law. The God who agrees with us on everything is a terrifyingly convenient ally. Is religion, then, at its worst, merely the ultimate act of self-justification, a way to anoint our own desires with the oil of the infinite? Yet, to dismiss it solely on these grounds feels like dismissing a dream because it isn't real. A dream, while a product of our own mind, can reveal profound truths about our anxieties, our desires, our unresolved conflicts. In the same way, the projection of the divine, even if it is a projection, can serve as a powerful tool for self-examination. The stories of the gods grappling with morality, with duty, with love and loss provide a safe space to explore the most difficult aspects of the human condition. They externalize the moral dilemmas we face internally. The myth becomes a crucible in which we can test our own values. When we see Zeus's jealousy lead to tragedy, or Loki's deceit unravel into chaos, we are engaging in a form of ethical training. The value may not lie in the objective existence of the characters, but in the subjective impact of the narrative on our own moral development. The mirror, even if it shows a distorted, grander image, can still help us see ourselves more clearly. So, we are left with a landscape where the gods wear human faces, and our mythologies become the emotional diaries of our species, written in the stars. They are the stories we tell to make sense of the senseless, to find companionship in a vast cosmos, to give voice to the storms within us. But a diary, however profound, is a private document. It can guide the individual, but can it bind a community? A God who is as fickle and emotional as we are might inspire art and poetry, but can such a deity provide a stable foundation for law and order? To move from a collection of individuals to a civilization requires more than a shared set of stories. It requires a shared set of rules that feel as immutable as the cycles of the moon. And for that, humanity would need to perform a different kind of magic. It would need to transform the rules themselves into something sacred to convince the heart that the law of the tribe was, in fact, the law of the universe. If a god of emotions is the first projection, what is the next? How do you build a cage for the human spirit that it will not only accept, but worship? The air in the clearing is thick with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. A man stands before the elders, his head bowed not in shame, but in a terror that grips his very soul. He has broken a taboo, taken from the sacred grove. The chieftain's voice is not loud, but it carries the weight of ages. The punishment is not banishment or a physical lashing. Instead, he speaks words that chill the blood. The spirit of the forest will punish you. And the man believes. His fear is not of the elder, a frail figure he could easily overpower. It is a fear of something unseen, a vast, invisible force that watches from the shadows of the ancient trees. This is the moment when law transcends rule and becomes sacred. It is no longer a command from man, but an echo from the cosmos. This instinct to sanctify our rules runs deep, etched into the very blueprint of our being. At the biological level, we are wired for social compliance, particularly under the gaze of an unseen observer. Our brains house a sophisticated monitoring system, a network that lights up when we believe we are being watched, even by a simple drawing of eyes on a wall. This internal watchdog, a legacy from our earliest ancestors, modulates our behavior, curbing selfish impulses in favor of group cohesion. It is the faint, primal whisper that tells us, someone is watching. This neurological tendency provides the fertile ground in which the seeds of sacred law can take root. It is the biological cradle for the idea of a divine witness. What does it say about our species that our morality is so easily and so powerfully activated by the mere illusion of a spectator? Long before written legal codes, before courtrooms and constitutions, human societies were built upon this foundation. Archaeological and historical records reveal a universal pattern, the most critical moral injunctions against murder, against incest, against deceit, were almost invariably wrapped in the mantle of the divine. The code of Hammurabi was handed down by the sun god Shamash. The laws of ancient Egypt were intertwined with the judgment of Osiris. In these early cultures, a transgression was never merely a crime against the community. It was an act of blasphemy, a rupture in the sacred order of the universe. The perpetrator was not just a criminal, but a pollutant, whose actions risked bringing divine wrath upon the entire tribe. The law was not a human invention, but a divine revelation, its authority absolute and unquestionable because its source was beyond reproach. This sacred packaging made compliance a matter of spiritual survival, not just social convenience. Could a society, in its fragile infancy, have held together without this powerful supernatural glue? Even in our modern, seemingly secular world, the ghost of this instinct persists. Our legal systems are founded on secular principles, on social contracts and reasoned debate. Yet for many, a higher law still holds sway. The feeling that certain truths are self-evident, that rights are inalienable, carries a faint echo of a divine grant. The sense of a moral compass, an internal voice that guides us toward right and wrong, even when no human eye is upon us, is often described in terms that border on the spiritual. This internalized eye of God remains a potent force for ethical behavior, a private policeman patrolling the quiet corners of our conscience. It suggests that the sacredization of law was not merely a clever tool of social control, but an externalization of a deep psychological need for a moral anchor in a chaotic world. But if this anchor is cast from within, what does it truly moor us to? This very success, however, invites a troubling counter-question. Is the belief in sacred law nothing more than a brilliant, evolutionary hack? A psychological manipulation perfected over millennia to ensure the survival of the collective by instilling a fear of invisible punishment? If morality is contingent upon the belief in a watchful deity, then what becomes of ethics in a godless universe? Can we construct a robust, enduring moral society based solely on human reason, empathy, and a shared understanding of well-being? The project of secular humanism is a grand experiment attempting to do just that, to build the cathedral of morality without the cornerstone of the divine. It seeks to convince us that we should not murder because it causes immense suffering and destabilizes society, not because a God forbids it. Yet, one might wonder if this reasoned argument, for all its logical elegance, can ever summon the same visceral, unwavering power as the fear of a spirit's curse or a God's judgment. Does a morality derived from pure logic lack the emotional resonance required to hold the line in our darkest, most selfish moments? When we cloak our laws in the sacred, they cease to be mere instructions. They become a psychological and spiritual tether, connecting individual action to cosmic consequence. This tether can foster incredible social cohesion and personal integrity, creating a world where a person is honest not because they might get caught, but because they believe the universe itself demands it. The law is internalized, becoming a part of one's identity. Yet this strength is also its profound vulnerability. The tether is only as strong as the faith that binds it. What happens when the faith falters, when the sacred grove is cut down and the spirit within is silent? The law, stripped of its divine aura, can quickly revert to being seen as an arbitrary human imposition, something to be circumvented when convenient. This reveals the delicate bargain at the heart of civilization. We sanctify our laws to give them power beyond the sword, to make them resonate in the human heart in a way that force alone never could. It is an attempt to legislate the soul. But this strategy contains its own point of failure. For when a law proves ineffective, or when the world presents a tragedy so profound that it shatters the logic of divine justice, what recourse remains? if a sacred law fails to protect the innocent or punish the wicked, if the spirit of the forest does not strike down the transgressor, then the system requires a more potent, more inexplicable intervention to maintain its authority. It requires an event that bypasses reason altogether, an occurrence that cannot be explained by the existing rules of the world, sacred or secular. It requires a miracle. And so when logic and law both fall short, when the sacred contract appears broken, the human mind reaches for a different kind of explanation. Why does one person perish from a simple illness, while another survives a fall from a cliff? When the predictable patterns of cause and effect, of crime and punishment, fail to provide comfort or meaning, we are left with a vacuum. Into this void steps the concept of the miraculous, not as a suspension of natural law, but as a narrative tool to patch the holes in our understanding. It becomes the logic for those who have run out of logic, the answer when all other answers fail. But if we rely on miracles to validate our laws, what does that say about the laws themselves? Are we building our world on a foundation of rules, or on the enigmatic and unpredictable possibility of their exception? The story begins not with a scripture or a sermon, but with a body in motion against a clear blue sky. A child, no older than 5, chasing a goat along a high ridge. The ground gives way. For a moment, the small figure is suspended, a dark shape against the sun, before the long, silent arc downward, a plummet of 20 meters onto the jagged rocks below. The villagers who rush to the scene expect to find only tragedy. Instead, they find the child sitting up, dazed but unharmed, not a single broken bone. The search for a reason is swift and absolute. The elders do not speak of the angle of impact, the possibility of a fortunate bounce from a lower, softer branch, or the remarkable resilience of a young body. They do not search for a physical cause. They look at each other, their eyes wide with a knowing fear and wonder, and they say, simply, "A God saved him." The story spreads through the village, then to the next, moving faster than any fact ever could. It is not a story of luck, but of intervention. It is a miracle. This human impulse to see a hand in the chaos, to find a signal in the noise, is as old as consciousness itself. It is wired into us, a fundamental feature of our mental architecture. Our brains are not impartial recording devices. They are storytellers, and they have a distinct preference for a certain kind of plot. The mundane, the thousands of times a child walks safely along the path, is quickly discarded, deemed unworthy of long-term storage. But the exception, the event that shatters the predictable pattern, is flagged as critically important. It triggers a surge of neurotransmitters in the brain's reward centers, a chemical cocktail of surprise and significance. This event is not just remembered, it is compelling. It demands to be shared, to be woven into the fabric of a narrative. A story of a normal day dies with the sunset. A story of a miraculous survival lives for generations, its details polished and perfected with each telling. The miracle, then, is not just an event. It is a cognitive event, a story that our own biology insists we privilege above all others. This neurological preference for the exceptional forms the fertile ground from which miracles sprout across cultures and millennia. Archaeology and history are not merely records of kings and conquests. They are also archives of the inexplicable. A shaman dances for rain under a parched sky, and the next day, clouds gather. A priest offers a sacrifice for a dying chieftain, and the fever breaks. A community prays for deliverance from a plague, and the sickness recedes as mysteriously as it arrived. In the absence of meteorology, medicine, or epidemiology, what other explanation could there be? These unexplainable turnarounds are meticulously recorded not as flukes, but as evidence. They are the data points that prove a hypothesis. The world is not a closed system of cause and effect. It is a conversation. The gods, the spirits, the ancestors are listening, and they respond. These recorded miracles become the cornerstone of tradition, the proof texts of faith, the moments where the divine membrane is perceived to be thinnest. They are the logic for a world that does not yet have the language of probability, And even now, in an age illuminated by the relentless glare of science, the shadows where miracles dwell have not vanished. They have merely shifted shape. Modern psychology reveals a paradox. The more we can explain, the more tenaciously we cling to a space for the inexplicable. Science can describe the mechanics of a disease, but it cannot always soothe the terror of the diagnosis. So, millions turn to healing energy, to the comforting weight of a lucky charm, to the whispered prayers for a spiritual miracle that transcends clinical prognosis. These are not necessarily rejections of science, but rather supplements to it. They are an acknowledgement that the map of known causes is not the entire territory of human experience. When logic reaches its frontier, at the edge of a prognosis, in the face of random tragedy, at the limits of our control, the mind instinctively reaches for something else. It reaches for a story that offers meaning, where there is only mechanism, purpose, where there is only chance. But this reliance on the miraculous carries a quiet, persistent counter-argument. If a miracle is merely a statistical outlier, an event of such low probability that it feels like an impossibility, then what are we building upon? If our memory is a biased curator, selectively preserving the wondrous and discarding the ordinary, are we constructing entire worldviews on a foundation of cognitive error? Is the belief in miracles, then, not a glimpse into the divine, but the final, desperate effort of a hopeful heart to assert order over chaos, to insist that the universe is not indifferent? This skepticism is the necessary friction against faith, the cold water of probability thrown on the warm fire of wonder. It asks the uncomfortable question: are we seeing a pattern because it is there, or because the pattern-seeking engine in our skulls cannot tolerate a blank canvas? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing one side over the other, but in understanding the human need that the miracle fulfills. When logic stands helpless at the cliff's edge, unable to explain the unscathed child, the human spirit turns toward the impossible. It is in this twilight zone of understanding, in the gap between what we can prove and what we feel to be true, that a special kind of person finds their purpose. This is the space where the shaman, the priest, the prophet emerges. They are the ones who do not see the miracle as a problem to be solved, but as a language to be interpreted. They are the translators for the whispers of the gods. And if one can speak the language of miracles, if one can stand in that liminal space and claim to understand its rules, what power does that confer? When the voice of the divine seems to speak through a single individual, does that not make them the most powerful person in the village? In the deep emerald heart of the Amazon, where the air is thick with the scent of wet earth and blooming life, the most respected man in the village is not the strongest warrior nor the most skilled hunter. He is the shaman. His authority is not measured in physical strength, but in a perceived connection to the unseen. He is the one who can, it is said, hear the whispers of the spirits, and read the omens in the flight of a bird. When a child falls ill, when the hunt fails, when the rains do not come, the entire community turns to him. The most critical decisions, when to move the village, whether to wage war, are suspended in a state of collective breath-holding, awaiting his divination, his journey to ask the sky. His power is absolute because it is believed to be divinely sanctioned. He is the original interpreter, the first bridge between the tangible world of human need and the intangible realm of perceived cosmic order. This deference to the individual, who claims a special line to the supernatural, is not merely a cultural quirk. It is etched into our very biology. We are a species wired for survival, and survival, for our ancient ancestors, was a precarious gamble. In a world teeming with unseen threats, predators they couldn't see, diseases they couldn't understand, weather patterns they couldn't predict, a sense of control was the most precious commodity. The human brain, a magnificent pattern-seeking engine, abhors a vacuum of explanation. Faced with the terrifying randomness of nature, we instinctively gravitate towards those who offer a narrative, a reason, a rule. The shaman, by claiming to understand the capricious will of the gods or the spirits, provides that crucial sense of order. He transforms chaos into cosmology. To obey him is not just a social duty, it is a survival strategy. It makes the tribe feel protected, guided, and psychologically secure. His pronouncements, however ambiguous, are a lighthouse in a fog of uncertainty. Is our innate tendency to submit to such figures, then, a hard-wired relic of a more dangerous past, a cognitive shortcut that offered our ancestors a comforting illusion of agency in a merciless world? The archaeological record whispers this truth back to us from the depths of time. Long before kings and presidents, there were the priests, the shamans, the oracles. In the flickering firelight of prehistoric caves, alongside stunning depictions of prey animals, we find handprints and hybrid human-animal figures, suggesting the early presence of ritual specialists, individuals who could traverse the boundary between the human and spirit worlds. These figures were the original gatekeepers. They decided the propitious day for the hunt, the sacred time for planting, the fate of prisoners of war. Their influence was total because it permeated every aspect of life. They were the calendar, the medical expert, the meteorologist, and the political advisor, all rolled into one. Their authority was not derived from a standing army, but from a perceived monopoly on celestial communication. They held the keys to community cohesion and existential meaning. Could it be that the first hierarchies of power were not built on physical force alone, but on this carefully cultivated access to the divine? This ancient psychological template did not vanish with the arrival of modernity. It merely shapeshifted. The robe of the shaman was exchanged for the collar of the priest, the vestments of the prophet, or even the sharp suit of the charismatic ideologue. The core dynamic remains eerily familiar. In times of profound crisis, war, plague, social upheaval, societies exhibit a powerful gravitational pull toward individuals who claim to possess a special, unassailable truth. They are the modern-day interpreters of the invisible world, whether that world is a promised heaven, a utopian future, or a complex conspiracy theory. They offer clear, if simplistic, answers to agonizingly complex questions. They channel our collective anxieties into a narrative where they are the guiding light. The language may have changed, but the deep-seated human yearning for a figure who can make sense of the senseless, who can promise protection from the storm, has proven remarkably persistent. Does this suggest that our celebrated rationality is often a thin veneer, easily pierced by the primal comfort of surrendering to a higher or seemingly higher authority? But a shadow of a doubt always lingers at the edge of the firelight. Was the shaman truly a vessel for the divine, or was he simply the most astute psychologist of his tribe, a master of reading the subtle currents of fear and hope in his people? His pronouncements were often deliciously vague, open to a multitude of interpretations, allowing him to claim credit for success and deflect blame for failure. His knowledge of herbal remedies was real, born of generations of observation, but it was shrouded in ritual to enhance its power and mystery. He understood that power thrives on ambiguity and the strategic management of fear. In a world without scientific transparency, where the lines between knowledge, belief, and deception were hopelessly blurred, was his authority ultimately a brilliant, perhaps even unconscious, exploitation of a fundamental human vulnerability? Does the figure of the shaman reveal less about the existence of gods and more about the terrifying power of information asymmetry, the immense advantage held by whoever controls the narrative in a data-poor environment? When information is the ultimate currency, the greatest power is the right to speak for the gods. From those first ambiguous utterances, from the interpretation of a bird's flight or the entrails of a sacrifice, humanity began a profound project. We started to write our history not just with deeds, but with myths. The collective memory of a tribe, its origins, its values, and its destiny, began to be woven into stories. These were not mere entertainments. They were the foundational software of civilization, From the epic of Gilgamesh seeking immortality, to the biblical narratives of Exodus and Covenant, to the legendary descent of Lac Long Quan and Ao Ko giving birth to the Vietnamese people, mythology became the vessel. It was how a people remembered who they were, defined their place in the cosmos, and charted a course for their future. These stories, born around ancient fires, were the first drafts of identity, the original maps of meaning. But if these myths were forged in the crucible of human need, shaped by the interpreters who claimed divine insight, what does that say about the truths they carry? Are we then living inside stories told by the first politicians, our deepest identities shaped by the most successful narratives of the past? The child does not see the ceiling of the mud brick house. He sees the ink-black expanse of the celestial river, the glittering scales of 1,000,000 divine fish. His father's voice is low, a steady rhythm against the night's silence, telling of Ra's great bark, a vessel of fire navigating the treacherous waters of the underworld. Each hour of the night is a gate guarded by demons, each a trial to be overcome so that the sun may rise again, reborn, to bless the earth. The child is not merely listening, he is aboard that bark. He feels the dread of Apophis, the serpent of chaos, rising from the depths, and the triumph of Ra's defenders. This story is not entertainment, it is the operating manual of the universe, the reason the world exists in a coherent, predictable way. It is the first and most vital layer of his identity. Before he is a boy, a son of a potter, or a future citizen of Thebes, he is a passenger on the solar bark, a living part of a cosmic drama that gives his world meaning. This ancient Egyptian child, huddled in the dark, was participating in the most fundamental project of our species, the writing of our collective autobiography. We are, biologically, creatures of memory. Our brains did not evolve to store cold, hard data like a library archive. They evolved as survival engines, and survival, for a social primate, depends on the collective. The most efficient way to organize, preserve, and transmit the accumulated knowledge of a tribe, where to find water in the dry season, which plants are poisonous, how to appease a rival group, was not through a list of facts, but through a story. A story embeds information within a framework of cause and effect, heroes and obstacles, emotional stakes, and satisfying resolutions. The neural pathways that light up when we hear a compelling narrative are the same ones that would activate if we were living the events ourselves. The tale of a hunter's bravery against a mammoth isn't just a report. It's a virtual reality simulation, wiring the next generation with the courage, tactics, and communal pride necessary for their own survival. Our minds are not just receptive to storytelling, they are built for it, craving the structure and meaning that narrative provides, transforming individual experience into collective inheritance. This inheritance was first codified on a grand scale in the great epics. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the Mahabharata, the foundational narratives of the Bible. These were not merely religious texts or simple chronicles. They were the foundational software of early civilization, a sprawling multi-volume Wikipedia etched in clay, papyrus, or memory. Within their verses, one could find history, or a version of it, the flood that reshaped the land, the wars that forged kingdoms. One could find law, the codes of conduct between people, the consequences of betrayal, the price of hubris. One could find science, explanations for the weather, the movement of stars, the cycle of life and death. And, most importantly, one could find identity. They answered the profound questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What is expected of us? They provided a shared point of reference, a common vocabulary of symbols and values that allowed thousands and eventually millions of individuals to cohere into a society with a shared purpose and a shared sense of self. A Babylonian scribe and a merchant, though strangers, were both children of the same stories, citizens of the same mythological landscape. This psychological need for a shared narrative is not a relic of the ancient world. It pulses through our modern veins. The national myths of today, Whether it is the story of Romulus and Remus for the Romans, the journey of Moses for the Israelites, or the tale of the dragon and the fairy for the Vietnamese, serve the same essential function. They provide a genesis. They tell a people that their existence is not an accident, that their land was chosen, their ancestors were special. These stories confer a sense of belonging, a place in a long, unbroken chain that stretches from a heroic, mythic past into a purposeful future. They are the psychological bedrock upon which culture is built, offering each individual a role to play in a story much larger than their own fleeting life. To be part of a people is to subscribe to their collective autobiography. Yet this comforting tapestry raises a disquieting paradox. Where does the boundary lie between a truth, exaggerated by time and telling, and a pure fabrication that has been standardized into belief? The story of Ra's journey is a beautiful, profound explanation for the cycle of day and night, but we now understand it through the lens of astronomy and planetary rotation. Was the genesis of such a myth an observation of a real cataclysmic event, a solar eclipse that became woven into a divine narrative? Or was it born entirely from the fertile ground of human imagination, a necessary fiction created to impose order on a terrifying and unpredictable world? If our societies are, as they appear to be, built upon and sustained by fictions, however noble or useful, then what does that say about the nature of our reality? Is our collective autobiography a work of historical fiction, blending fact and allegory, or is it something closer to fantasy? The stories that bind us also blind us to the possibility that the very foundations of our identity are as substantial as a dream. Perhaps the answer is that the autobiography of a species is not written in ink, but in belief. A story told often enough and deeply enough felt ceases to be a mere account and becomes a truth, not in a factual sense, but in a functional one. It becomes the reality in which a culture lives and breathes, and as that reality grows more intricate, as a simple tribe evolves into a complex civilization with specialized roles, farmers, soldiers, merchants, rulers, the singular story is no longer sufficient. It must fracture, multiply, and diversify to explain the new complexities of the human experience. The lone sky god who controlled weather, war, and love must give way to a pantheon, a divine reflection of a society that has itself become multifaceted. If a single story can birth a people, what happens when a people's world becomes too vast for just one tale? When the universe is no longer a simple stage for a single hero, but a sprawling metropolis of competing desires and domains, does our need for narrative force us to create a society of gods in our own image? The Greek farmer, his hands calloused and stained with earth, looks not to a single, all-powerful sky father as he kneels. Instead, his whispers are for Demeter, the lady of the grain, whose breath is the scent of ripe barley. He understands her moods, the specific language of her favor. Across the rocky terrain, a Spartan hoplite checks the grip on his spear, his mind fixed on Ares, the clamorous god of battle, whose presence is felt not in gentle rains, but in the chaotic din of the shield wall. And in the shadowy port, a merchant with a quick smile and quicker fingers offers a small, secret libation to Hermes, patron of travelers and thieves, asking for cleverness in a deal and forgiveness in advance. Each has chosen a specialist, a divine expert for a specific human need, not so different from how we might select a department or a specialist to address a particular problem in our own lives. This is the world of polytheism, not as a chaotic pantheon of competing egos, but as a deeply pragmatic psychological map of a complex existence. It is a system that allows the human psyche to be multidimensional, to hold conflicting values and desires not in a state of internal war, but in a state of delegation. The human brain, for all its majesty, is a machine built for efficiency, often struggling with the cognitive load of contradiction. It seeks patterns and craves simplicity. How can one entity simultaneously embody the gentle patience required to nurture a seedling and the savage fury needed to survive combat? How can the same moral framework govern the absolute honesty of a judge and the necessary deception of a strategist? Polytheism offers an elegant solution. It externalizes these contradictions. By assigning distinct domains to distinct deities, the mind simplifies the world's bewildering complexity. The farmer does not need to reconcile the violence of a storm with the benevolence of a harvest. The storm belongs to Zeus, the harvest to Demeter. This cognitive division of labor is a profound adaptation. It allows a person to be fully devout in their plea for peace to one God, and equally devout in their plea for victory in war to another, without the paralyzing guilt of hypocrisy. The psyche is compartmentalized, each sacred compartment a sanctuary for a different facet of the human experience. Is this not a more honest reflection of our own inner lives, where the loving parent, the ambitious professional, and the fearful individual can coexist, often uneasily, within a single mind? This externalization of our inner complexities finds a direct parallel in the structure of the societies that birthed these gods. The pantheon of Olympus, or of the Norse, or the Hindu traditions, is not a random collection of supernatural beings. It is a divine bureaucracy, a mirror of social specialization. As ancient villages grew into city-states and empires, as roles became more defined, the potter, the soldier, the merchant, the ruler, so too did the divine landscape. Athena was not merely a goddess of wisdom, she was the patron of craftsmen and the strategic defense of the city. Hephaestus was the divine blacksmith, his lameness a symbol of the specialized, sometimes isolated nature of skilled labor. The pantheon reflected a world where survival and prosperity depended on the intricate interplay of different, highly specialized skills. To worship a specific god was to affirm the importance of a specific human endeavor, to seek mastery and blessing within a defined realm. The gods, in their plurality, sanctified the diversity of human life itself. They gave a sacred purpose to every trade, every struggle, every joy, suggesting that the entire spectrum of human activity was watched over, was meaningful. And have we truly left this model behind? We may no longer sacrifice rams to Poseidon before a sea voyage, but the psychological architecture of polytheism persists, disguised in modern attire. We may not have temples to a god of wealth, but we have entire economic theories and rituals that we follow with near religious fervor. We believe in the power of science for medicine, the power of therapy for the mind, the power of luck for the lottery ticket. We compartmentalize our appeals. A person might light a candle in a church for a sick relative, then check their horoscope for career advice, and later meditate to a secular mindfulness app for inner peace. This is a personalized, a la carte spirituality. We have our modern equivalents of household gods, the saint statues on the dashboard, the lucky charm in a pocket, the ritual of a pre-game pep talk. We still seek out specialists for different aspects of our being, fragmenting our hopes and fears into manageable portions, handled by different experts, both secular and sacred. Is this not a continuation of the same ancient impulse to distribute the overwhelming burden of existence across multiple focused points of appeal? Yet this very convenience, this division of divine labor, raises a shadow of a question. Is polytheism a celebration of human richness, or is it a necessary crutch, a way to avoid the terrifying silence of a universe without any gods at all? Perhaps we create a god for every unexplained corner of life because the alternative, a vast, indifferent cosmos governed by blind chance and physical laws, is too existentially bleak to bear. By populating the darkness with specialized spirits, we ensure there is always an answer, always an ear to listen, even if the listener is a fiction of our own making. Does the multiplication of deities represent a deep engagement with the world's complexity, or is it a form of psychological avoidance, a refusal to stare into the abyss and see only our own reflection staring back? The comfort of having a god for every problem might be the very thing that prevents us from grappling with the unsettling possibility that there are no solutions, only circumstances. When every aspect of life has its own divine representative, faith itself undergoes a subtle transformation. It becomes less a matter of unified devotion to a single truth and more a system of spiritual services. The The relationship between worshipper and God can become transactional, a series of contracts and negotiations. I will build you a shrine if you grant me a safe journey. I will offer you the first fruits of my harvest if you ensure their abundance. This fragmentation of devotion, while practical, creates a spiritual marketplace. But a marketplace, no matter how vibrant, eventually requires a governing body, a central authority to enforce contracts and maintain order. The more responsibilities are divided among specialized powers, the more pressing the need for a unifying principle, a supreme power that can overrule the petty squabbles of lesser gods and impose a final, absolute order. The very success of a decentralized polytheistic system sows the seeds for its own potential transformation. Could it be that the sprawling, beautiful chaos of many gods inevitably calls forth the idea of the One? And if that call is answered, what kind of order emerges when the many are subdued by the One? The sun rises over a new city. Its rays do not fall upon the familiar crowded temples of Thebes, with their babble of gods for every facet of life, a god for the river's rise, a goddess for the harvest, a deity for childbirth. Instead, the light illuminates a singular, stark horizon. This is Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten, a capital city built from scratch in the desert. It is 1350 BCE, and the pharaoh Akhenaten has done the unthinkable. He has declared the entire pantheon of Egypt, a civilization over a millennium old, to be obsolete. In their place, there is only the Aten, the sun disk, a singular, all-powerful deity whose rays end in gentle hands, bestowing life directly and exclusively upon the king and his family. This was not a sudden, mystical revelation. It was a political masterstroke. By erasing the complex priesthoods of Amun and Osiris, institutions that had grown rivalrous in their power and wealth, Akhenaten consolidated ultimate authority in one place: the throne. The one god in the sky mirrored the one ruler on earth. This was not merely a spiritual reformation, it was the birth of a political blueprint, a quiet, ruthless revolution disguised as divine will. The human mind, in its ancient wiring, seems to crave a focal point in the chaos. Deep within our neurobiology lies a preference for simplicity over complexity when under threat. Faced with the unpredictable fury of a storm, the terror of a predator's shadow, or the simple, overwhelming vastness of the night sky, our ancestors sought patterns. They assigned agency to the wind and the river, creating a pantheon of personalities to negotiate with. But this polytheistic world, while rich and explanatory, is a system of distributed power. To ask for rain, one must appease the rain god; for a safe journey, the river god; for a good harvest, the earth goddess. It is a form of spiritual bureaucracy. The emergence of monotheism, however, taps into a different cognitive pathway. It offers a single point of contact, a supreme commander of the cosmos. This is cognitively more efficient. Instead of managing relationships with a multitude of capricious beings, the believer appeals to one ultimate source of order. Is this neurological preference for a unified command structure the fertile ground in which the seeds of political monotheism were sown? Does our own brain's search for a singular cause make us susceptible to a singular cause-giver? This cognitive inclination found its perfect expression in the crucible of empire. The rise of the great monotheisms, Judaism's refined concept of Yahweh, Christianity's rapid spread through the Roman machinery, Islam's unifying conquests, did not occur in isolated tribal villages. They emerged and flourished precisely as human societies were consolidating into vast, multi-ethnic, and centrally administered empires. A sprawling kingdom stretching across deserts and mountains, encompassing dozens of languages and cultures, cannot long be held together by a patchwork of local deities. How does an emperor in Rome command allegiance from a tribesman in Gaul or a merchant in Alexandria? The answer is a theological innovation as profound as the aqueduct or the legion. One God for one empire. The God of the conquerors becomes the God of the conquered, a divine mandate that transcends local loyalties and sanctifies a new, universal order. The pharaoh was the sole intermediary of the Aten. The Roman emperor became Pontifex Maximus, the chief bridge to the divine. In this grand alignment, theological unity becomes the glue of political unity. The complex, often contradictory voices of many gods are silenced, replaced by the clear, unambiguous decree of the one, a decree that inevitably echoes the will of the earthly sovereign. Was this a conscious strategy, or a slow cultural evolution converging on the most stable structure for imperial control? Even in our ostensibly secular modern world, the architecture of monotheistic thinking persists, stripped of its divine vocabulary but not its fundamental shape. We see it in the cult of the singular charismatic leader who promises to cut through the messy noise of democracy and deliver simple solutions. We see it in our economic systems, where the invisible hand of the market is often treated as an omnipotent, if unpredictable deity whose laws must be obeyed without question. Our media ecosystems too often devolve into battles of singular absolute truths, where nuance is a sign of weakness and complex issues demand a solitary villain or a messianic savior. This is the monotheistic impulse in a new guise, the hunger for a central controlling narrative, a single point of origin for both our problems and their solutions. We have traded the pantheon of gods for a pantheon of ideologies, but the psychological comfort of a supreme, ordering principle remains deeply seductive. Have we truly outgrown the need for a theological king, or have we simply found new thrones upon which to seat our new gods? This leads us to the central, unsettling paradox. Is the monotheistic God a discovery of profound spiritual truth, or is it the ultimate political technology? The narrative of revelation, of a burning bush, a voice from heaven, a final prophet, is powerful and foundational. But history whispers a more pragmatic counter-narrative. The god of Akhenaten died with him, his city abandoned and his name cursed, his experiment in solar absolutism too radical, too sudden, yet the template survived. The concept of a single universal truth administered by a single powerful hierarchy proved to be an incredibly resilient tool for social organization. It streamlined law, justified conquest, and quelled internal dissent by branding it not just as treason, but as blasphemy. The heretic is a far more dangerous figure than the mere rebel, for he threatens the cosmic order itself. In this light, monotheism can be seen as a brilliant, if terrifying, innovation in social control, a way to align the hearts and minds of millions under a single banner, creating a collective identity powerful enough to build civilizations and destroy them. Does the voice of God, then, often sound suspiciously like the voice of the state? So we are left standing in the ruins of Akhenaten, the wind sweeping sand across the foundations of a forgotten revolution. The journey from the chattering, diverse world of polytheism to the silent, imposing monument of monotheism appears to be less about a purer understanding of the divine and more about a more efficient organization of human power. It is a move from a decentralized spiritual network to a centralized theological empire. Faith, it seems, is never truly separate from the structures of authority that cradle it. Yet, even as we recognize this political scaffolding, a question lingers, haunting the clear, hard lines of this new order. For if God is merely a tool of kings, a fiction for empire, then why does the human heart, in its most private and vulnerable moments, still strain to hear a whisper that is meant for it alone? What unspeakable need does this singular focus fulfill that the many gods of the river and the field could never satisfy? The political blueprint is clear, but the mystery it was built to contain remains, stubbornly alive. And if the consolidation of one god was a political and cognitive evolution, then what happens when the human mind, now accustomed to this singular focus, begins to turn its intellectual tools upon the divine itself? When faith is no longer a simple submission to power, but becomes a subject for inquiry, a problem to be solved? In the hushed silence of a medieval scriptorium, the only sounds were the scratch of a quill and the soft sigh of a monk contemplating the divine. His fingers, stained with ink, moved across the vellum, not copying scripture, but wrestling with it. He was crafting a labyrinth of logic around a single, audacious question. Can God create a stone so heavy that he himself cannot lift it? This was not an act of defiance, but one of profound devotion. Within the very heart of belief, a new faculty was stirring. Faith was no longer just a destination to be reached, it had become a landscape to be explored. The human mind, having conceived of the divine, was now beginning to question its own conception. This was the quiet, revolutionary birth of theological intelligence, the evolution of thought itself. The human brain, a 3-pound universe of firing neurons, did not evolve merely to avoid predators or find food. It developed a unique and perplexing feature: metacognition, the ability to think about thinking. This introspective loop is the biological cradle of abstraction. It allows us to hold an idea in our minds, turn it over, examine its facets, and question its origins. In the realm of faith, this meant that the raw, instinctual fear of thunder could eventually be refined into a debate about the nature of omnipotence. The same neural pathways that light up with the visceral fear of a predator also illuminate with the serene yet equally powerful contemplation of a paradox. The mind that could imagine a protective spirit watching over the tribe could also, millennia later, conceive of an unmoved mover, a first cause that set the cosmos in motion. Was this intellectual leap simply an accident of biology, a byproduct of a brain growing too complex for its own good? Or was it the very mechanism through which humanity could approach a truth too vast for simple instinct to grasp? This cognitive shift left its mark not in the fossil record, but in the libraries of history. Across the globe, independently, the great religious traditions began to grow intricate philosophical skeletons within their bodies of belief. Early Christianity, born from Jewish apocalypticism, soon found itself grappling with Greek philosophy in the bustling markets of Alexandria. The simple, powerful message of Jesus was parsed through the lenses of Platonic forms and Aristotelian logic, giving rise to centuries of theological debate about the Trinity, a concept that attempts to define the undefinable nature of the divine using the fragile tools of human language. In the East, the straightforward teachings of the Buddha, focused on the end of suffering, blossomed into the vast, intricate metaphysics of Mahayana Buddhism, with its discourses on emptiness and the nature of reality that read like quantum physics written 2,000 years too early. Meanwhile, the Islamic Golden Age saw scholars in Baghdad and Cordoba who saw no contradiction between studying the Quran and the works of Aristotle, weaving faith and reason into a single, glorious tapestry of knowledge. In each case, belief was not a static endpoint. It was a living, breathing entity that demanded to be understood, not just felt. It evolved from a set of rituals to appease the gods into a comprehensive system for understanding the universe and humanity's place within it. The deity was no longer just a character in a myth. It was becoming a principle in a philosophical argument. And this evolution did not cease with the closing of the medieval monasteries. Modern psychology reveals that even as traditional anthropomorphic images of God recede in many parts of the world, the underlying cognitive architecture that built them remains stubbornly active. The mind, it seems, has a default setting for seeking pattern, purpose, and agency in the chaos of existence. Those who profess no belief in a white-bearded man in the sky often speak instead of a cosmic consciousness, an underlying intelligence to the universe, or an immutable law of karma. These are not rejections of the sacred so much as they are its abstractions, theological thinking stripped of its mythological skin. The questions remain eerily similar. Is there a moral order to the cosmos? Does our life have a purpose that transcends our material existence? The language has changed, becoming more scientific or philosophical, but the deep, humming frequency of the inquiry is the same. Have we simply traded one set of metaphors for another, more socially acceptable set, all the while following the same ancient, neural pathways toward meaning? But this very act of intellectualizing faith raises a profound and unsettling counterpoint. In refining the raw ore of belief into the polished metal of theology, do we risk losing its essential warmth? What happens to the trembling soul in the darkness, seeking not a logical proof, but a comforting presence. A sophisticated argument about theodicy, the problem of evil, may be intellectually satisfying, but it is a cold companion next to the simple, visceral hope that a loving God hears a desperate prayer. When God becomes a concept, a first cause, or a cosmic principle, what remains for the human heart that craves a relationship? Theologians may debate the attributes of the divine for centuries, but the farmer praying for rain, the mother grieving a child, the sinner seeking forgiveness, they are not looking for a perfectly reasoned thesis. They are reaching for a hand in the dark. Does the ascent of the mind into the thin air of abstraction inevitably mean abandoning the heart in the valleys below, where the real, messy, emotional work of life and death actually happens? When belief steps into the arena of reason, it does not vanish. It transforms. It sheds its skin, adapting to the new climate of the inquiring mind. The deity of the philosopher may bear little resemblance to the god of the peasant, yet both are born from the same fundamental human need to make sense of a bewildering world. But this intellectual journey, for all its grandeur, eventually runs into a wall that no amount of reasoning can scale. All our abstractions, our cosmic consciousnesses, and our first causes ultimately meet their match in the stark, non-negotiable reality of the grave. It is here, at the edge of the abyss, that the most potent promise of religion is made, a promise that speaks not to the mind, but directly to the primal fear of extinction. And so the evolution of thought finds its ultimate test not in a debating chamber, but in a quiet room, at a deathbed. If our intellect can craft a god, can it also craft an eternity? The warrior's body lies broken on the cold foreign soil, his breath a final mist in the dawn air. In the world he left behind, they will not speak of his death as an end. They will raise a toast in the great hall, their voices echoing off timber beams, and speak of his journey to Valhalla. They will describe a place where mead flows from an endless horn, where the sun gleams on golden shields, and where every day is a battle fought alongside brothers, only to be resurrected each evening for a feast under the watchful eyes of the gods. No one has ever returned from that hall to confirm the details. Yet the belief is as solid as the earth beneath their feet, a comfort as tangible as the warmth of the fire. It is a promise written not on parchment but in the very marrow of their bones, a story so potent it can transform the terror of oblivion into a narrative of glorious continuation. This deep-seated need to envision a reward beyond the final curtain is perhaps one of the most human of all traits. It begins not in the soul, but in the circuitry of the brain itself. Our large, complex neocortex, the seat of self-awareness and foresight, is a blessing and a curse. It grants us the ability to plan for the future, to build civilizations, and to love deeply. But with that power comes the terrifying knowledge of our own mortality. We are, as far as we know, the only animals burdened with the certainty of our own end. This creates a profound cognitive dissonance. The sense of a vibrant, conscious I crashing against the cold, hard fact of its eventual extinction. To resolve this constant low-grade terror, the mind performs a remarkable act of self-defense. It constructs a bypass. It imagines a realm where the I does not cease, but merely transitions. From a purely biological standpoint, the concept of an afterlife, of a heaven, can be seen as an evolutionary adaptation for a brain too smart for its own good, a psychological cushion against the paralyzing fear that might otherwise prevent us from living, loving, and striving at all. Is the promise of paradise, then, simply a neurological coping mechanism, a beautiful lie our own minds tell us to make the truth bearable? This internal mechanism found its external expression as soon as humans began to bury their dead with tokens and tools. On the vast savannas where our ancestors hunted, the idea of a good place after death was likely tied to practical abundance, a land with plentiful game and fresh water. As societies grew more complex, so did their heavens. The scattered animistic spirits of the wild coalesced into the structured hierarchical paradises of organized religion. The Abrahamic faiths in particular refined the concept into a powerful, detailed vision. The dusty, hardship-filled existence of desert nomads gave way to the Quran's descriptions of gardens beneath which rivers flow, with purified spouses and eternal refreshment. The Christian heaven evolved from a vague spiritual union with God to a glittering city of gold and jewels, a place of perfect justice where every tear is wiped away. These were not merely fantasies, they were social tools. They offered solace to the oppressed, the poor, and the suffering, assuring them that their earthly trials were but a prelude to an eternal reward. In doing so, they also became a powerful mechanism for social control, encouraging virtue and obedience with the ultimate carrot. Could the grandeur of our heavens be a direct reflection of the depth of our earthly suffering? In our modern, seemingly secular age, one might expect such ancient consolations to fade into obscurity, rendered obsolete by science and reason. Yet, the blueprint of heaven appears remarkably resilient. While adherence to orthodox religion may wane in some parts of the world, the underlying architecture of belief often remains. Many who would reject the literal pearly gates of Scripture still cling to a vaguer, more personal form of the narrative. They speak of positive energy, of becoming one with the universe, or simply of a peaceful place where they will be reunited with lost loved ones. It is a heaven stripped of dogma but not of comfort, a decentralized, non-institutional paradise that serves the same core function: to soften the sharp edge of loss and to impose a sense of moral order upon a chaotic universe. We have traded the specific geography of Scripture for the ambiguous landscape of spirituality, but the destination, in essence, remains the same. Does this persistence prove that the idea is an innate human need, or simply that we are reluctant to let go of a comforting story? This leads us to a quiet, unsettling question. If heaven, in all its forms, lacks any empirical evidence, why does it remain so universally seductive? Is it because the alternative, a universe indifferent to our loves, our struggles, and our very consciousness, is too bleak to contemplate? We accept the possibility of a post-death existence, not because the arguments for it are logically airtight, but because the reality of life is often brutally unfair. The child stolen by illness, the visionary cut down in their prime, the countless lives ground down by poverty and injustice, the sheer weight of this undeserved suffering demands a counterbalance. Heaven becomes the necessary equation that restores balance to a world tilted steeply towards tragedy. It is the ultimate promise that the scales of justice will, in some unseen realm, be set right. But in our yearning for this cosmic fairness, do we risk devaluing the very real, fleeting beauty of the only life we can be certain of? Are we so focused on the potential reward that we forget the profound value of the struggle itself? Heaven, in the end, is the final dream of the wounded. It is the story we tell in the dark to keep the fear at bay, a testament to our incredible capacity for hope in the face of the unknown. Yet every promise of a reward inherently contains its shadow. For the concept of a final, perfect justice to hold any weight, there must be a consequence for those who evade it in this life. If there is a paradise for the virtuous, then logic, and perhaps a deep-seated desire for retribution, demands a corresponding place for the wicked. The dream of heaven inevitably gives birth to its terrifying twin, and once that idea is unleashed, it becomes a tool of immense power, one that can be wielded not just to comfort, but to control. For what greater incentive to obey can there be than the threat of an eternity designed not for reward, but for punishment? The child's world is made of simple, stark lines. In the dim light of a grandmother's room, the words are not complex theological arguments, but vivid, terrifying pictures. A thief, his hands still sticky from stolen fruit, is cast into a lake of fire. A liar's tongue is pulled out by iron hooks over and over for 1,000 years. The images are primal: the sear of flame, the crush of stone, the suffocating plunge into boiling oil. The child does not understand civic law or social contracts, but the lesson is seared into the developing mind with the clarity of a brand on skin. To err is to be punished, forever. This fear is an ancient tenant in the human skull, a ghost that has found a comfortable home. It speaks a language older than words, one that our brains are uniquely wired to understand. Neuroscience suggests that our minds are Velcro for negativity, Teflon for joy. A single traumatic event can etch its details into our memory with acid, while a dozen peaceful days might blur into a pleasant but unremarkable haze. This bias is a survival mechanism, a relic from a time when forgetting the scent of a predator or the sting of a poisonous berry meant extinction. Fear is a more potent and immediate motivator than reward. The promise of a future paradise might inspire patience, but the threat of imminent, eternal agony commands obedience, now. It is a crude but effective tool for behavior modification, a psychological club hanging in the air, ensuring compliance long before the abstract concept of ethical virtue can take root. This club has been wielded with remarkable consistency across the tapestry of human civilization. Long before the great monotheistic religions carved their elaborate hellscapes, the ancients understood the power of postmortem consequences. The Egyptian duat was a perilous journey where the heart was weighed against the feather of Maat. Failure meant annihilation by the devourer Amit. But it was the organized faiths that systematized terror, architecting infernos with bureaucratic precision. In medieval Christianity, the concept of purgatory's cleansing fires and hell's unending torments was not merely dogma, it was a social stabilizer. The vivid frescoes on church walls, depicting sinners writhing in exquisite agony, served as a graphic public service announcement for the illiterate masses. It was a deterrent against chaos, a divine enforcement mechanism for a social order where earthly justice was often scarce or corrupt. In the East, the visions were no less intricate, though sometimes tinged with a different philosophical hue. Buddhist texts describe Naraka, a complex array of hells, 8 hot, 8 cold, where beings reside for eons, suffering punishments meticulously tailored to their specific karmic debts. The Hindu cosmology presents a similar, vast universe of underworlds, where Yama, the god of death, dispenses justice before souls are reborn. These are not merely places of pointless torture, but realms of cosmic consequence, where moral arithmetic is settled with brutal, literal finality. The message was universal. Your actions echo beyond the grave, and the universe itself is a courtroom with a very particular kind of executioner. The fear of hell became the glue holding communal morality together, a shared nightmare that defined the borders of acceptable behavior. And what of this fear in our modern, disenchanted world? For many, the literal flames have cooled into metaphor. We have traded the sulfurous pits for black holes and the heat death of the universe. Yet, the psychological architecture remains, its foundations sunk deep into our collective subconscious. Even the staunchest atheist might speak of a guilty conscience, a feeling that wrongdoing carries an inherent weight, a need for atonement. Is this the ghost of hell, stripped of its supernatural garb? Has the external threat been internalized, transformed from a fear of divine punishment into a more intimate, self-administered anguish? The feeling of karma, the sense that the universe will somehow balance the scales, persists as a whisper from our ancestral past. It suggests that the idea of hell tapped into something fundamental about human moral psychology, a deep-seated intuition that profound injustice demands a proportional and perhaps eternal reckoning. But this very effectiveness forces an uncomfortable, almost heretical question. If the fear of hell is so perfectly explained as a social tool for control, a biological lever for conformity, what does that say about its divine origin? Is it a sacred truth, or is it fear itself, personified and weaponized? Throughout history, the threat of eternal damnation has been deployed, not just to foster virtue, but to enforce orthodoxy, to crush dissent, and to fill the coffers of the powerful with indulgences purchased by terror. The same mechanism that might have kept a peasant from stealing bread could also be used to justify burning a heretic at the stake. The line between a moral safeguard and the instrument of pure power becomes dangerously thin. Is the shudder we feel when contemplating hell the awe of divine justice, or is it the primal fear of a child being threatened by an omnipotent parent? Can a morality rooted in such fear ever be truly ethical, or is it merely a sophisticated form of coercion? Perhaps the answer, like the concept itself, is not a single thing. Hell is the necessary shadow that gives heaven its light. Without the possibility of absolute loss, can there be a concept of absolute gain? This dichotomy, the cradle and the club, the reward and the threat, creates the tension in which belief thrives. It becomes a sophisticated mechanism, a psychological coping strategy for the brutal uncertainties of existence. In a world riddled with inexplicable suffering, where the wicked often prosper and the innocent perish, the idea of a final, perfect justice offers a profound, if terrifying, solace. It reassures us that the scales will be balanced, even if we must wait for an afterlife to see it. The belief in hell, then, is not just about control. It is also about a desperate human need for order in a chaotic universe. But if hell is the stick and heaven the carrot, what does that make the believer? A donkey chasing a reward, flinching from a threat? Or is there a space beyond this economy of fear and desire, a motivation purer than the avoidance of pain? And if we were to peel back this first layer, if we were to consider that the entire cosmic system of punishment and reward is not a divine decree but a human invention, a story we tell ourselves to make the unbearable seem bearable, what then would be the real source of our pain and the real nature of our solace? The scent of sandalwood smoke curled through the cool, dim air of the temple, a visible breath of devotion. A woman, her face a map of recent grief, knelt before an ornate altar. Her hands, trembling slightly, lit another stick of incense. Her son was gone, taken by the brutal random physics of a traffic accident. The doctors had offered condolences, the therapists coping strategies, but she came here. As the smoke rose, she whispered to the serene, gilded statue, "My child is in a better place now." There was no evidence for this statement, no empirical data to support the claim of a blissful afterlife. Yet, as she spoke the words, a palpable shift occurred. The unbearable tension in her shoulders eased. The crushing weight on her chest lightened, if only for a moment. She felt, against all logical odds, a measure of peace. The pain did not vanish, but it became something she could carry. Her belief, a story she chose to tell herself about the universe, was not a search for truth in the scientific sense. It was a psychological analgesic, a balm applied directly to a wound that reason could not reach. This profound, almost biological response to belief is not merely a cultural artifact. It is written into the very architecture of our brains. Deep within the human skull, in the intricate folds of the medial prefrontal cortex, a remarkable process unfolds when we engage in acts of faith or conviction. This region, a central hub for our sense of self and our social reasoning, lights up with neural activity. It begins to orchestrate a chemical symphony designed for survival. The stress hormone cortisol, which floods our system in times of trauma and grief, sharpening our senses for a threat that cannot be fought or fled, is gently suppressed. In its place, the brain secretes oxytocin, the molecule often dubbed the cuddle hormone, associated with bonding, trust, and a feeling of safety. This is not a metaphor. Belief, the act of accepting a comforting narrative, triggers a measurable physiological state of calm. It is as if the mind, confronted with an unmanageable reality, possesses its own internal pharmacy, and faith is the key that unlocks the cabinet. The story of a better place, a divine plan, or a benevolent force does not change the external event, but it fundamentally alters the internal landscape upon which that event lands. The brain, in its ancient wisdom, seems to prioritize survival over strict accuracy. Is our capacity for belief, then, less about perceiving the divine and more about a hardwired mechanism for emotional homeostasis, a biological cradle that rocks us back from the precipice of despair? Long before neuroscience could map these internal pathways, our ancestors had already discovered the collective power of this psychological salve. Across the globe, separated by continents and millennia, human societies independently arrived at the same solution for the existential terror of death and suffering: ritual. From the elaborate funeral rites of the Neanderthals, who placed tools and flowers alongside their dead, to the grand pyramids of the Egyptians, constructed as vessels for a pharaoh's journey to the stars, we see a universal impulse to narrate the void. These were not idle superstitions, but sophisticated technologies of the spirit. A communal prayer, a shared sacrifice, a synchronized chant. These acts were a form of collective pain management. They transformed individual, isolating agony into a shared, meaningful experience. The story of an afterlife, of reincarnation, of ancestral spirits watching over the tribe, served a crucial function. It bound the community together in the face of loss, ensuring that the social fabric did not tear under the weight of individual grief. The narrative itself was the medicine. The specific gods or spirits changed from culture to culture, but the underlying purpose remained startlingly consistent: to build a scaffold of meaning around the abyss, to create a story sturdy enough for a community to stand on when the solid ground of reality had fallen away. In the echoing chambers of prehistoric caves and the soaring naves of medieval cathedrals, can we hear the same fundamental human sound? Not just a cry of fear, but the active, courageous construction of a shield against the cold indifference of the universe. Modern psychology provides a clinical lens for this ancient practice, and its findings are both liberating and deeply unsettling. The efficacy of belief, it turns out, is largely independent of its truth value. Robust studies tracking survivors of natural disasters, violent crime, and personal tragedy consistently show that individuals who hold strong spiritual or religious beliefs demonstrate greater psychological resilience. They experience lower rates of post-traumatic stress disorder, recover a sense of purpose more quickly, and report higher overall well-being. The content of the belief is almost secondary. It is the act of believing itself that confers the benefit. The brain does not seem to care if the comforting story is objectively real. It only cares that the story is felt to be real. This presents a profound paradox. Is faith then a noble strength, a testament to the human spirit's ability to find light in the darkest of places? Or is it, at its core, a magnificent, species-level self-deception? A necessary illusion we collectively agree to uphold because the alternative, a universe devoid of intrinsic meaning, where suffering is random and death is final, is simply too terrifying to bear for a conscious mind that can contemplate its own extinction. Do we believe in gods because they exist, or because we cannot withstand the silence that follows when we stop believing in them? This is the delicate double-edged nature of our psychological analgesic. It soothes, but it may also blind. It builds resilience, but it may discourage the harder, more painful work of confronting a difficult truth. The belief that a tragedy is part of a plan can offer immense comfort, but it can also stifle the anger needed to demand justice or prevent the next tragedy. The pain is diminished, but perhaps so is a certain kind of clarity. The mother in the temple is not seeking a peer-reviewed paper on the afterlife. She is seeking a way to wake up tomorrow. Her belief is a life raft, and to question its seaworthiness while she is still adrift in an ocean of grief seems a cruel kind of intellectual arrogance. The utility of the story is its immediate truth. And so, we are left with a tentative observation, a single slice of a much larger truth. Belief, in its many forms, may not change the facts of a harsh world. It does not bring back the dead, erase injustice, or cure disease, but it possesses the undeniable power to change the human being who must endure those facts. It recalibrates the scales of suffering. It is the story we tell ourselves in the dark, and the sound of our own voice, narrating a world that makes sense, is often enough to keep the darkness at bay. This ability to craft a narrative of meaning is perhaps our most fundamental tool for survival. It is the loom on which we weave the chaotic threads of experience into a pattern we can understand and endure. But if this narrative instinct is what allows us to stand firm in a chaotic world, what does it mean that the very foundation of our societies, our laws, our money, our nations, are also just stories we have all agreed to tell each other? The fire crackles, a tiny, defiant sun against the encroaching darkness. An elder's voice, weathered and deep, rises with the smoke, painting pictures in the air. He speaks of a mountain that scrapes the sky, home to forgotten gods, and of a great flood that once cleansed the world. The children's eyes are wide, reflecting the flames, their breaths held. The adults, too, are silent, their faces masks of concentration. In this shared circle, no one interrupts to say, "But that's just a story." For in this moment, it is not. The story is the reality. The mountain looms in their collective mind's eye. The chill of the primordial water is felt on their skin. This scene, repeated across millennia and continents, is not a quaint relic of a simpler time. It is the fundamental crucible of our humanity. We are, at our core, a species of storytellers. This compulsion is not merely cultural, it is woven into the very fabric of our biology. Deep within the human brain, there exists a remarkable integrated mechanism, a filter for language and imagination. When we hear a narrative, our neurons don't just process words as discrete packets of information. Instead, they fire in complex sequences, activating not only the language centers, but also the regions responsible for sensory experience, emotion, and motor control. To hear a story about running is, in a faint but measurable way, to prepare the body to run. This neural mirroring is the secret engine of empathy. A well-told story allows a listener to synchronize their emotional state with that of the narrator, to feel the thrill of the hunt, the ache of loss, the warmth of homecoming. This shared emotional resonance is the bedrock of trust, and trust, more than any weapon or tool, is what enabled early human groups to coalesce, to move beyond individual survival and coordinate their actions toward a common, imagined goal, whether that goal is bringing down a mammoth or building a settlement. The story, then, functions as a cognitive and social glue, binding individuals together with invisible threads of shared experience long before the first written word was ever etched into clay. The evidence of this ancient drive is etched not only in our neurons, but on the walls of time itself. Venture into the profound silence of the Lascaux cave, and you are not merely looking at prehistoric art. You are reading a storyboard. The dynamic figures of bulls, horses, and stags are not static portraits. They are frozen moments of a narrative, a hunt, a ritual, a plea to the forces of nature. These images were a technology of memory and meaning, a way to externalize the inner world, to make the intangible tangible. Similarly, the rich oral traditions of indigenous cultures around the world are not simple collections of fanciful tales. They are intricate, living libraries that encode knowledge of the land, the stars, the seasons, and the moral codes of a people. They answer the profound questions of existence. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What is our place in this vast cosmos? Through symbol, image, and spoken word, our ancestors have always been telling stories about the world they could see and the one they could only imagine, building a shared understanding that transcended the immediate and the individual. And we have never stopped. The mediums have evolved, from flickering firelight to the flickering light of a cinema screen, from oral epics to printed novels to digital streams, but the underlying psychological machinery remains unchanged. Modern psychology confirms that storytelling remains the most potent vehicle for transmitting beliefs, values, and identity. A dry list of ethical principles is easily forgotten, but embed those principles within the journey of a character, a Luke Skywalker, an Atticus Finch, a Moana, and they take root in the soul. The parables of religious texts, the mythic arcs of blockbuster films, the compelling narratives of political movements, even the brand stories that shape our consumer desires, all leverage this ancient power. We continue to believe, to buy, to vote, and to belong, not simply because of cold, hard facts, but because we are captivated by a story. We see ourselves in the narrative. It provides a framework for our own chaotic experiences. It tells us who we are and, perhaps more importantly, who we could be. But this immense power carries a shadow. If storytelling were merely a neutral tool for transmitting information, why do stories so often become contested ground? Why are they altered, censored, embellished, or erased by those in positions of authority? The very fluidity of narrative, its susceptibility to manipulation, raises a troubling question. Do we believe in a God, a nation, or a cause because the story itself is inherently powerful and true? Or is our belief often a product of relentless repetition and the perceived authority of the storyteller? A myth repeated by a king from a throne or by a high priest from a pulpit carries a weight far beyond the same myth whispered in a marketplace. The story becomes a vessel not just for meaning, but for power. The one who controls the narrative, who gets to define the heroes and the villains, the sacred and the profane, holds the keys to a profound form of collective psychology. When storytelling becomes the primary mechanism for transmitting belief, the myth is not merely preserved in amber. It is shaped, polished, and sometimes weaponized. The narrative can be tailored to justify hierarchy, to legitimize rule, to unite a people against a designated other. The same story that once fostered cooperation around a campfire can, in a different context, be used to mobilize an army. The line between a shared belief that enables large-scale collaboration and a dogma that demands blind obedience can be perilously thin. The power of the storyteller, therefore, is a double-edged sword, capable of building magnificent civilizations or justifying their destruction. And from this power to shape reality through narrative emerges the potential for a new and uniquely human form of control. If the stories we tell can so easily be bent to serve power, what does it take for a story to bind millions of strangers together, not in subjugation, but in willing collective purpose? What alchemy transforms a mere tale into a force that makes a stranger willing to die for a symbol they have only ever imagined? In the shadow of the Capitoline Hill, where the air hummed with the scent of incense and the low murmur of 1,000 voices, a Roman citizen placed an offering at the feet of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. He did not know the merchant from Ostia who knelt beside him, nor the legionnaire sharpening his blade a few paces away. Their lives, their lineages, their immediate concerns were entirely separate. Yet, in that shared moment of supplication, a silent contract was signed. They were bound not by blood or direct acquaintance, but by a common faith in an unseen order, a celestial bureaucracy that mirrored their own sprawling empire. This shared belief was the invisible mortar holding together the stones of their aqueducts, the disciplined ranks of their legions, and the vast, complex legal code that stretched from Britannia to Syria. It was a trust fall on a civilizational scale, and it worked. How is it that an abstract concept, a belief in gods no one has ever seen, can compel millions of strangers to cooperate, to build, and to conquer? The answer may lie buried deep within our own biology, in the ancient wiring of the human brain. Evolution equipped us for life in small, intimate bands, where trust was built on familiarity and reciprocal altruism. We are naturally suspicious of outsiders, a survival mechanism that served us well on the savannah. But this instinct creates a ceiling for cooperation. A tribe can only grow so large before it fractures. The Great Leap, the cognitive revolution that allowed our species to break through this ceiling, was the capacity for what we might call imagined alliances. When a group of strangers begins to believe in the same God, the same sacred principle, or the same foundational story, a remarkable transformation occurs. The other is no longer a complete outsider. They are a fellow believer, a custodian of the same secrets. This shared faith acts as a social passport, a preemptive guarantee of goodwill that bypasses our innate tribalism. It is a psychological technology, perhaps one of the most important ever invented, that allows us to build networks of cooperation far exceeding the Dunbar number. But if this bond is forged in the mind, what does that say about the divine entities we believe are binding us? Are we connecting to the heavens, or are we simply using the idea of the heavens to connect with each other? The archaeological record stands as a silent testament to this power. Long before Rome, the pharaohs of Egypt did not merely rule. They were gods incarnate, walking embodiments of Horus. Their authority was not just political, it was cosmological. To obey the pharaoh was to align oneself with the very order of the universe. This divine mandate allowed for the coordination of thousands of workers to raise the pyramids, projects that would be unimaginable without a unifying, sacred purpose. The Roman Empire itself was a masterclass in the strategic application of shared belief. As its borders expanded, swallowing diverse cultures and peoples, it did not simply impose its gods by force. Instead, it practiced a form of divine syncretism, strategically mapping Jupiter onto Zeus, Minerva onto Athena, and allowing local deities to be absorbed into the broader Roman pantheon. This was not merely tolerance, it was a brilliant administrative tactic. By providing a common religious framework, Rome gave its disparate subjects a shared identity that transcended their ethnic differences. The empire became more than a political entity, it was a spiritual community. The legions marched not just for an emperor, but for a civilization under the protection of specific named gods. Is the stability of an empire, then, proportional to the strength of its shared myths? One might assume that in our modern secular age, this ancient mechanism has become obsolete. We have science, rational governance, and global economics. Yet look closer. The rituals persist, merely clothed in different vestments. The solemn reverence for a national flag, the shared grief at a war memorial, the collective hope invested in a constitution. These are the secular sacraments of our time. They function in precisely the same way. When strangers stand together, hands over hearts, for an anthem, they are participating in a ritual that affirms a shared belief in an abstract idea, the nation. This belief fosters trust, encourages sacrifice, and enables large-scale collaboration, from funding a national highway system to mobilizing for a war. These symbols are our modern gods, the focal points of a faith that allows millions of strangers to see themselves as part of a single whole. Have we truly outgrown the need for divine intermediaries, or have we simply found new idols to worship in the temple of the state? This utilitarian view of belief, however, leads us to a precarious and deeply unsettling cliff edge. If faith is primarily a social adhesive, a tool for cooperation, then its sacredness is thrown into question. It becomes a means to an end. Does this reduce the profound, soul-shaking experience of the mystic, the devout prayer of the nun, or the quiet faith of the farmer to mere social programming? Are we, in essence, using the divine as a highly effective glue to hold our societies together, regardless of the truth of the deity in question? This perspective suggests that what matters is not the objective reality of the God, but the collective acceptance of its narrative. The God that fosters the largest, most stable, and most productive cooperation is the fittest God, the one most likely to survive and spread its doctrine. This is a cold, Darwinian logic applied to the realm of the spirit. It implies that the gods we worship are, in part, a reflection of our societal needs for order and scale. Does the survival of a god depend more on its moral teachings or on its utility as a tool for social organization? As populations swelled and societies became more complex, the demands placed on these unifying beliefs intensified. A local river spirit might suffice for a village, but an empire spanning continents requires a god with universal jurisdiction, a moral code applicable to all, and a priesthood capable of administration. The god must scale. This necessity drives a kind of theological evolution, where beliefs are refined, scriptures are codified, and heresies are purged to create a more coherent and powerful system of social control. And from this crucible of scaling cooperation emerges an inevitable, and often violent, Consequence: religious competition. When two systems of belief, each claiming universal truth, encounter one another, conflict is not just possible, it is almost logical. The same faith that builds a cathedral can justify its destruction if it stands on land claimed by a different cathedral. The stage is set for a battle not just of armies, but of cosmologies, in the relentless contest for human hearts and minds. Which gods will prove strong enough to unite, and which will fade into obscurity? Is the ultimate test of a faith its capacity to inspire love and cooperation among its followers, or its ferocity in vanquishing its rivals? This competition reveals the terrifying double edge of the blade. For the same profound belief that can inspire a community to build hospitals and feed the poor can also be invoked to justify the Crusader's sword, the Aztec priest's sacrificial knife, or the modern terrorist's bomb. The very psychological mechanism that allows for unprecedented cooperation within a group can simultaneously justify unprecedented brutality toward those outside it. The belief becomes a boundary, separating us from them, with a clarity that is both empowering and lethal. The strength of the bond is mirrored by the depth of the chasm it creates. If faith is the cradle of civilization, can it also be the club that destroys it? And when we wield this powerful tool to build our towers of cooperation, can we ever truly ensure that the stones are not cemented with the blood of those who believed in a different blueprint altogether? The sun, a furious disk of gold, would crest the mountains surrounding the city. In the temple precinct, the air, thick with the scent of copal incense and anticipation, would hum with a singular, terrifying purpose. A priest, adorned in vibrant feathers and jade, would raise an obsidian blade. Its edge, sharper than any steel, was not meant for an enemy in battle, but for a chosen offering. The belief was absolute. Without the lifeblood of a human heart, the sun god Huitzilopochtli would grow weak. The world would plunge into eternal darkness, and all of creation would cease. Here in the heart of the Aztec Empire, faith was not a matter of personal comfort. It was a cosmological necessity, a contract written in blood. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, died each year, not for land, not for treasure, but for a belief. This is the starkest price tag ever placed on conviction, a testament to the terrifying power of an idea to demand the ultimate sacrifice. What is it within us that allows an abstract concept to command such a profound physical cost? The answer may be etched into the very architecture of our brains. When a belief becomes deeply held, it ceases to be a mere opinion and transforms into a core component of our identity. Neuroscientists have observed that fervent belief, particularly of the kind that promises a grand reward, salvation, enlightenment, a place in paradise, activates the same neural pathways associated with primary rewards like food or sex. The ventral striatum, a key region in the brain's reward circuit, lights up with dopamine at the prospect of fulfilling a sacred duty or achieving a divine favor. This neurological hijacking is potent. It can motivate acts of incredible self-sacrifice where the individual's life becomes a currency to purchase a greater, transcendent good. The same biological mechanism that drives a parent to work tirelessly for their child's future can, when channeled through an absolute belief, drive a warrior to certain death. Is the courage of a martyr, then, a form of spiritual addiction, a desperate craving for a reward that lies just beyond the veil of mortality? This biological lever has been pulled again and again throughout the long, somber theater of human history. The Aztec sacrifices were not an anomaly, but a vivid chapter in a much darker volume. For centuries, armies marched under the banner of the cross and the crescent, their soldiers convinced that their violence was sanctified, that killing was a route to redemption. The Crusades, the Inquisition, the religious wars that scarred Europe, each was fueled by a certainty so absolute that it justified rivers of blood. These were not merely conflicts over resources. They were battles for the soul of the world, where the enemy was not just wrong but evil, an obstacle to divine will. This weaponization of faith is not confined to the distant past. In our modern world, suicide bombers detonate their vests with prayers on their lips, And militants justify the slaughter of innocents by invoking the name of their god. The language changes, the symbols differ, but the underlying calculus remains eerily similar. A profound belief is used to override the most fundamental human instinct, the will to live, and the empathy for the lives of others. Has faith, in its most extreme expressions, become the ultimate weapon, one that turns its adherents into unthinking instruments of its own propagation? Yet, to lay the blame solely at the feet of belief itself is to ignore the hands that wield it. Is religion the source of the conflict, or merely the most potent vocabulary available to express deeper, more primal human drives? Tribalism, fear of the other, the thirst for power. A sacred text can be a cradle of compassion or a club of coercion, depending on who is reading it and to what end. The same scripture that preaches, "Thou shalt not kill," has been used to sanction holy war. The problem may not be the belief, but the human tendency toward absolutism, the desperate need for certainty in an uncertain world. We sculpt our gods in our own image, and then invoke their authority to justify our own desires. The violence, then, is not born from faith, but from the corruption of faith by ambition, fear, and the innate human hunger for dominance. If we were to strip away all religious belief, would conflict cease? Or would we simply find new flags to rally under, new ideologies to absolutize, new reasons to draw the same old lines in the sand? This leads to a dangerous, almost heretical question. If strong belief can be so easily twisted into an engine of suffering, should we then seek to eradicate it? Is a world without deep faith a safer world? To imagine this is to imagine a humanity stripped of one of its most defining and, paradoxically, most beautiful features. For every story of a temple sacrifice, there is a story of a hospice worker offering comfort to the dying, motivated by a faith in human dignity. For every holy war, there are countless acts of charity, forgiveness, and selfless love performed in the name of a higher power. Belief built the libraries of Timbuktu and the universities of medieval Europe. It inspired breathtaking art, music, and architecture that still stirs the soul centuries later. It gives meaning in the face of meaninglessness, hope in the depths of despair. To discard belief to avoid its perils would be like discarding fire because it can burn, or language because it can lie. The cost of belief is not just measured in blood, it is also measured in the light it brings to the darkness. So, the real dilemma is not whether to believe, but how. The price of faith, therefore, is not a simple ledger of lives lost. It is the eternal tension it creates within us, the constant negotiation between our highest aspirations and our basest instincts. It is the question of whether we can hold our convictions with humility, whether we can possess truth without being possessed by it. Can we learn to cherish the light of our own beliefs without feeling compelled to extinguish the flickering candles of others? The blood on the Aztec altar is a stark warning, a fossilized echo of the cost of absolute certainty. But the silence of a world without any belief at all might be an even higher price to pay. Perhaps the true challenge is not to choose between belief and unbelief, but to navigate the treacherous, beautiful space in between, where our convictions inspire us to build rather than to burn, to connect rather than to conquer. Is it possible to keep the faith without losing our humanity? And if this tension is the true condition of our existence, then perhaps the beliefs themselves are not static monuments, but living, breathing entities, subject to the same relentless pressures that shape every other form of life. The humid air of the Amazon hangs thick, a living blanket of scent and sound. Here, deep within the emerald cathedral of the rainforest, a shaman of a tribe once traced the gnarled bark of a centuries-old kapok tree, feeling the pulse of a spirit within. The tree was not just wood and leaf. It was a person, a guardian, a nexus of stories whispered on the wind. Its falling leaves were not mere decay, but messages, its towering presence a testament to a world where everything, the river, the jaguar, the stone, was awake and aware. Today, in a clearing not far from where such trees might still stand, a small church raises a wooden cross against the same sky. The hymns sung are to a single God. The stories told are from a book printed across an ocean. The belief has transformed, its outer form reshaped by missionaries and the slow, inexorable pressure of a changing world. Yet, something of the old spirit remains. The profound respect for the forest, the sense of an animate world, has not vanished. It has simply found a new vocabulary, a new mythology to wear. The belief did not die. It evolved. This transformation is not a simple replacement, like one tool discarding another. It is a deeper, more organic process, akin to the biological evolution that shaped the very jungle surrounding the village. If we were to view belief not as a static set of doctrines but as a living entity, we might see it as a kind of cultural survival mechanism. Much like a gene, a meme of faith, a unit of cultural information, must navigate a landscape of selective pressures. It must offer its adherents a sense of meaning, a framework for morality, a comfort in the face of the unknown, and a way to bind a community together. Those beliefs that are too rigid, that fail to adapt to new climates, be they environmental, social, or intellectual, risk fading into obscurity. They become the fossilized myths we study in textbooks, fascinating relics of a lost world. But those that can mutate, that can incorporate new ideas or shed outdated practices without losing their core resonance, survive. They replicate, spreading from mind to mind, generation to generation. Is the persistence of a belief, then, not a testament to its fitness, to its ability to answer the perennial, aching questions of the human condition in a way that feels true for its time and place? The archaeological record is a sprawling graveyard and nursery for such beliefs, revealing a grand, messy narrative of spiritual metamorphosis. We can trace the journey from the myriad local deities of ancient animistic traditions, each spring, each mountain peak, each ancestral spirit demanding its due, to the consolidated pantheons of agricultural empires, where gods became specialists of thunder, love, and war. This was a consolidation of power mirrored in the human realm. Then came an even more profound shift, the move towards monotheism. This was not merely a simplification of a divine roster. It was a cosmological revolution, a sweeping unification of the cosmos under a single ultimate principle. The countless spirits of the forest and stream were absorbed, demoted, or demonized, their power funneled into one transcendent source. This God was portable, universal, no longer tied to a specific sacred grove or river. This adaptability was a masterstroke of cultural evolution, allowing the faith to travel along trade routes and conquests, outcompeting localized nature cults by offering a grander, more cohesive narrative. But even within these monolithic structures, the old currents flow. Saints often bear a striking resemblance to local deities, and folk traditions persist in the shadows of Orthodox liturgy, a testament to the tenacity of the old memes, forever finding cracks in the new walls. In our modern, hyper-connected world, this evolutionary process has accelerated to a dizzying pace. The great institutional religions now find themselves competing not with each other, but with a burgeoning ecosystem of personal spirituality. The grand cathedrals of faith are seeing their congregations drift towards a more intimate, bespoke landscape of belief. The language has shifted from sin and salvation to energy, vibration, and the universe. The strictures of dogma are exchanged for the fluidity of mindfulness apps, yoga practices that blend ancient discipline with modern psychology, and a belief in a nebulous law of attraction. This is not necessarily abandonment of the sacred, but another adaptation. In an age of individual empowerment and scientific authority, the soul seeks frameworks that feel personally authentic and intellectually permissible. The belief in something more evolves once more, shedding the skin of institutional authority for the garment of personal experience and scientific-sounding metaphor. Is this a dilution of profound tradition, or simply the latest necessary mutation of the human spirit learning to speak the language of a new era? But this biological metaphor, for all its explanatory power, casts a long, cold shadow. If faith is merely a product of cultural evolution, a successful meme in the struggle for mental real estate, does it retain any claim to transcendent truth? Is God just an idea that was particularly good at replicating itself? The framework of survival of the fittest, when applied to belief, can feel reductively cynical. It risks turning the cathedral, the mosque, the temple into mere artifacts of social cohesion and the mystic's ecstasy into a beneficial neurological glitch. And what of the malignant mutations? What of beliefs that foster not cohesion but division, not compassion but violence? History is littered with faiths that selected for fanaticism, that thrived by promising supremacy and purity, leading not to survival, but to destruction. The evolutionary lens shows us how a belief can be successful, but it remains stubbornly silent on whether it is good or true. Does the fact that a belief endures and spreads necessarily mean it points towards something real? Or could it merely be a particularly effective intellectual virus, one that hijacks our deepest fears and hopes for its own propagation? The tapestry of human belief is never static. It breathes, it grows, it fractures, and it intertwines. It is a river, not a stone. Some ideas, like the spirits of the Amazon, fade into the background hum of history. Others, like the great monotheisms, rise to span continents and millennia. But if we observe that certain themes, a concern for justice, a sense of awe, a yearning for connection beyond the self, recur across these evolving systems, are we seeing merely a successful cultural gene, or the faint, echoing signature of something that transcends culture itself? The beliefs that survive the harsh selection of time are not necessarily the most doctrinally pure, but perhaps the most resilient, the most adaptable, the most capable of answering the human heart's enduring questions. And so we are left to wonder, when a myth proves so durable, so powerful, so capable of shaping civilizations and comforting individuals across the chasms of centuries, at what point does it cease to be just a myth and begin to resemble a theory about the fundamental nature of reality? This constant becoming of belief suggests that the divine, or our perception of it, is not a fixed point in the sky, but a reflection shaped by the ground on which we stand. If we were to travel from the frozen silence of the Arctic, where the Inuit navigate a world of ice and animal spirits, to the sun-scorched savannas of the Maasai, whose God is as vast and central as the sky itself, we would find not a single truth, but a constellation of truths. Each culture, in its struggle and its solitude, paints its own heaven. The gods of the fisherman are gods of the capricious sea. The gods of the farmer are gods of the fertile soil. This breathtaking diversity is not evidence of error, but of adaptation. It reveals a profound flexibility at the core of our spiritual impulse. The human mind, faced with the infinite, does not simply record a pre-existing script. It creates. It weaves the available light and shadow into a story that makes sense of its particular world. So, if every culture crafts its own pantheon, its own unique relationship with the cosmos, what does that tell us about the source of the inspiration? Are we looking out at a single mountain from different valleys, each describing a different slope? Or are we each building our own mountain from the raw material of our own existence? The Arctic wind does not simply blow. It carves. It sculpts the ice and etches the landscape into a vast, silent cathedral. Here, under the shimmering veils of the aurora, the Inuit hunter waits at a seal's breathing hole. His world is one of immense, animate forces. The ice has a mood, the sea a will. For him, the soul of the whale is not a metaphor, it is a tangible presence, a guardian spirit woven into the very fabric of survival. The whale gives itself to the village, and in return, the village observes intricate rituals of respect, ensuring its spirit returns to the depths to be reborn. The sky above is not an empty void, but a populated realm, a narrative written in starlight and storm. 10,000 kilometers to the south, the air on the Maasai steppe shimmers with a different heat. The sun is a dominant, life-giving, and life-taking force. Here, the sky is the domain of Enkai, a deity who is both singular and dual. Enkai Narok, the black god, benevolent and generous with rain, and Enkai Nanyoki, the red god, stern and withholding. The Maasai do not look for spirits in individual animals, but in the overarching patterns of the drought and the deluge, the health of their cattle, the circle of life and death on the savanna. Their prayers rise like dust, appeals to a power that controls the very essence of fertility and famine. No god is like the other. The Inuits' pantheon of ice and animal spirits bears no resemblance to the Maasai's singular, celestial Enkai. There is no shared scripture, no common prophecy. The only commonality lies in the upward glance, in the human impulse to look at the immense, unpredictable sky and feel the need to light a fire, both literal and metaphorical, against the overwhelming dark. Each culture, in its isolation, has painted its own divine firmament onto the canvas of the cosmos, using pigments ground from the specific soil of its survival. This is not a coincidence, but a consequence of our very wiring. Buried deep within the folds of the human brain, in structures older than civilization itself, lies a cognitive default, the hyperactive agency detection device. It is a survival mechanism, a legacy from a time when the rustle in the grass was more likely a predator than the wind. To assume intention, to assign a who rather than a what, was a safer bet. This neurological tendency is universal, a shared inheritance in every human born. We are pattern-seeking creatures, predisposed to see faces in clouds and purpose in random events. But what we assign that purpose to, the character and nature of the agent we imagine, is a story written by geography. The raw cognitive capacity is the blank page. The environment provides the ink. The brain of the Inuit hunter and the Maasai elder share the same fundamental hardware for perceiving agency, but the software, the operating system of belief, is installed by the world outside. The hunter, whose life depends on reading the subtle intentions of the seal and the polar bear, populates his world with localized, immanent spirits. The pastoralist, whose existence hinges on the cyclical, large-scale patterns of rain and sun, conceptualizes a more centralized meteorological power. The divine, then, begins not as a revelation from the heavens, but as a projection from the earth, a way of making sense of the specific forces that govern life and death in a particular place. The archaeological record stands as a silent testament to this environmental mirroring. Long before global trade routes connected humanity, disparate cultures were building their heavens from the ground up. The sun-drenched civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia raised sun gods, Ra, Utu, to the highest thrones of their pantheons, deities whose daily journey across the sky mirrored the agricultural cycles of planting and harvest. Their myths are saturated with imagery of fertility, rebirth, and the eternal struggle against chaos, reflecting the precarious bounty of river valley life. Meanwhile, on their islands in the Aegean, the Greeks, a people of sailors and explorers, looked to Poseidon, a god of the unpredictable, tempestuous sea that was both their highway and their graveyard. The Norse, facing the long, dark winters of the north, told tales of the Fimbul winter, a great freeze that would precede the end of the world, and their gods were hardened warriors in a cosmos of ice and fire. In the frozen landscapes of Siberia, shamanic traditions spoke of masters of the animals and spirits of the cold, entities that had to be appeased for a successful hunt. The map of human gods, when laid over the map of human habitats, shows an uncanny correlation. The divine is a detailed cartography of human need and fear. In our modern, globalized world, this process has not ceased. It has accelerated and mutated. The great rivers of religious tradition, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, once confined to their cultural basins, now flow across continents, merging, diverging, and carving new channels. We see the rise of Western Buddhism, which often emphasizes meditation and mindfulness, while downplaying more culturally specific elements like cosmology and monastic hierarchy. It is a Buddhism adapted to a post-industrial, psychologically oriented society, a system for managing stress and finding meaning in a secular context. Conversely, in Africa and South America, Christianity undergoes a vibrant process of indigenization. It is not merely translated but transformed, incorporating local music, dance, and conceptions of community and ancestral spirits, creating a faith that speaks to the heart of a culture while wearing a new mask. This global exchange is a grand, ongoing experiment in theological adaptation, proving that even the most established gods are not immutable, but are continually resculpted by the hands of new environments and experiences. This fluidity, this undeniable link between landscape and deity, leads to a profound and unsettling question. If each culture, shaped by its unique geography and history, generates its own distinct pantheon or singular god, then where does that leave the concept of a true God? Is the divine a reality waiting to be discovered, or is it the ultimate Rorschach test, a vast, ambiguous canvas onto which we project the deepest fears and highest aspirations of our particular time and place? Is God the sculptor, or are we, with our environmentally conditioned brains, the sculptors of God? The very tools we use to seek the divine, our minds, shaped by survival in a specific world, may be the very filters that color and distort what we believe we find. If we accept, even tentatively, that our conceptions of the divine are profoundly shaped by our environment and social structures, then a new frontier of inquiry opens. What happens when that environment transforms at a pace that outstrips the slow, evolutionary crawl of myth? When a society is thrust from agrarian life into the digital age within a few generations, when ancient social hierarchies are upended, when existential threats like climate change or pandemics are global, systemic, and devoid of a simple, villainous face, the human need for narrative, for assigning agency and meaning, does not vanish. It seeks new outlets. Perhaps in such times of rapid, disorienting change, we stop creating gods. The old gods, tied to an older world, may feel distant, their myths irrelevant to the complexities of algorithmic governance and ecological anxiety. But the void of meaning is not left empty. The same cognitive machinery that once populated the sky with benevolent or wrathful deities now turns its attention to the shadows we ourselves have cast. When social injustices become too entrenched to solve, when collective trauma goes unacknowledged, when power operates in ways that are invisible yet crushing, the human spirit does not simply despair. It gives the injustice a face and a name. It tells a story. And so, the ghost story is born, not as mere entertainment, but as a profound social and psychological necessity. If gods are born from our relationship with the natural world, are not monsters and spirits born from our relationship with the social one? What does it say about a society when its most compelling narratives are not of salvation from above, but of unresolved grievances rising from below? When the living cannot find justice, perhaps it is only the dead who can bear witness. The 4-year-old child is told that a benevolent spirit lives within the ancient banyan tree at the edge of the village, and that if he makes a wish with a sincere heart, the spirit might grant it. He does not ask for evidence. He does not question the physics of how a wish travels from his lips to the tree's core. He simply believes. His small hands press together, his eyes squeeze shut with a concentration that furrows his brow. In that moment, the spirit is as real as the rough bark beneath his fingertips. This is the primal, unnegotiable territory of childhood faith, a landscape where the incredible is not just possible, but probable. It is a state of being where the world is received, not interrogated, where trust is the default setting for understanding everything from the laws of gravity to the promises of magic. This inherent credulity is not a flaw in the child's design. It is the very engine of his early survival and learning, but it also raises a profound question about the origins of our deepest convictions. Are we shaped by truth or by the timing of the stories we are told? The architecture of the developing brain reveals the first, foundational layer of this predisposition to believe. In the early years of life, the neural circuits responsible for imagination, narrative, and emotional connection mature at a startling pace, surging ahead of the prefrontal cortex, the brain's chief executive, the skeptical auditor that will later demand receipts and proof. A child's mind is a lush, undifferentiated garden where seeds of all kinds can take root. The knowledge that fire is hot, the understanding that a smile means love, and the conviction that invisible beings inhabit trees or guard hearths. This cognitive naivety is an evolutionary masterpiece. It allows a child to absorb the immense complexity of language, culture, and social rules at a breathtaking speed. To pause and doubt every piece of information offered by a caregiver, from "don't touch that, it's hot," to "the stars are the campfires of our ancestors," would be paralyzing. The brain, in its wisdom, prioritizes rapid acquisition over critical vetting. It is a sponge, not a sieve. But this same openness that allows a child to learn the names of animals also allows them to accept the existence of spirits. The mental machinery does not distinguish between a fact of physics and a fact of faith. It simply accepts the narrative. Is the line between knowledge and belief, then, merely a matter of which neural pathways have finished being paved? This biological receptiveness finds its perfect cultural counterpart in the practices of our earliest societies. Long before the written word, human knowledge and identity were stored and transmitted through oral storytelling. Around flickering fires, elders wove the fabric of reality for the young, stitching together observations of the natural world with explanations for the inexplicable. The thunder was not just a sound, it was the anger of a god. The changing seasons were a cyclical drama of death and rebirth. Children, with their brains perfectly primed for narrative, were the primary audience for these foundational myths. Their innate credulity was not an obstacle to be overcome, but a vital resource to be cultivated. A tribe whose children readily believed in the protective totem or the sacred hunting ground was a tribe that preserved its cohesion, its values, and its survival strategies across generations. The faith of the child became the faith of the community, ensuring its continuity. In this light, the transmission of belief is less about the revelation of divine truth and more about a sophisticated, unconscious cultural strategy. The stories that took hold were the ones that could capture a child's imagination, offering not just explanation, but meaning and belonging. Does the longevity of a belief system depend more on its factual accuracy or on its ability to resonate with the uncritical, story-loving mind of a child? Even as we mature, and the prefrontal cortex finally comes online with its toolkit of skepticism and logic, the ghost of that early credulity never fully departs. Modern psychology reveals how the impressions of childhood are etched not merely into memory, but into the very bedrock of our emotional responses. An adult may, through rigorous education, come to intellectually reject the supernatural entities of their youth. They may understand the science of weather, the psychology of dreams, the historical context of ancient texts. Yet standing alone in a dark forest, a primal whisper of the old stories may still stir. The rational mind scoffs, but the amygdala, the seat of fear shaped by those earliest narratives, reacts. This is the power of emotional anchoring. Many people, even self-professed atheists or agnostics, confess to a lingering, superstitious hesitation before openly challenging the deities of their childhood. It feels like a transgression, not just against a logical proposition, but against a deep, emotional truth installed during a time of vulnerability and trust. The child's fear of displeasing the spirit in the tree becomes the adult's unconscious reluctance to fully dismantle the idea of a cosmic judge. Have we, as rational adults, truly outgrown our childhood beliefs? Or have we simply built sophisticated intellectual scaffolding around an emotional core that remains untouched by reason? This leads us to a pivotal and perhaps unsettling crossroads. If our propensity for belief is so deeply wired into our biology and so effectively exploited by our cultural inheritance, then what is the ultimate source of our convictions? Are we believers because the divine is an objective reality that reveals itself? Or are we believers because we are taught about the divine at the precise moment in our cognitive development when we are programmed to accept what we are told without question? Is faith a glimpse into A higher plane? Or is it the psychological echo of a necessary childhood survival mechanism? The question reframes the very nature of religious experience, shifting it from a theological debate to a biocultural one. It suggests that the soil in which a seed is planted may be as important as the seed itself. If a child raised in isolation were to spontaneously conceive of a specific, complex God, that would be one thing. But the gods we know are the gods we were introduced to, in the cradle, by those we trusted most. Does this chain of transmission diminish the potential sanctity of the message, or does it simply reveal the intimate human mechanism through which the sacred has always been communicated? And if childhood is indeed the fertile ground where the seeds of the sacred are most readily sown, then what of our modern world? The ancient village with its banyan tree has been replaced by the global village with its digital networks. The campfire stories are now viral videos, and the elders are influencers and algorithms. The same brain that was once primed to believe in forest spirits and ancestral ghosts is now being fed a new diet of narratives. In an age of overwhelming complexity, where global events feel random and impersonal, the human mind still craves pattern, agency, and simple, compelling stories. It seeks a framework to make sense of the chaos, just as it always has. Could it be that the timeless human need for belief has not vanished, but has simply found new vessels? If the conditions are right, if the story is emotionally resonant, if it offers explanation and belonging, and if it is encountered during a moment of uncertainty or vulnerability, does it matter if the protagonist is a deity or a secret society? Perhaps the conspiracy theory is simply the modern mythology. Instead of capricious gods controlling the weather, we speak of hidden cabals orchestrating economic collapses. Instead of benevolent spirits, we have whistleblowers and alien saviors. The medium has changed, but the underlying cognitive melody remains hauntingly familiar. The child who once believed in the magic tree now, as an adult, navigates a forest of information, and the old instincts to find pattern, assign agency, and trust a compelling narrative can easily be reactivated. This suggests that the battle is not between truth and falsehood in some abstract sense, but between different stories competing for the same fertile neural real estate. The question then becomes not what we believe, but why. We are so constituted that belief in some form seems to be an inevitability. Are we, in the end, forever destined to be the children at the fire, listening for a story that will make sense of the dark?